me give you some advice. The process.
Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get this party on the road. Make sure I'm not there we go. You heard like 3 different versions of the same music going on at the same time because I didn't mute everything. But here we go. So this is my music. You can find it at zulaonline.com. And you can listen to it for free there. It's on Bandcamp, and you can get it on Amazon. So the physical copy's on Amazon, and the MP3 version is also on Amazon. So you can get both of those if you want them, or either one. If you buy the physical and just want an MP3 version, I could probably just like do that for you guys. Just like send me an email and I'll like hit you up with a link or something. So that's my music. I'm gonna play a little music today or improvise something because I want to make a couple of points about tropes and cliches and how you ought to approach them in writing. This is one of the things that a lot of people, I think, don't have the right, the right alignment with, or they think the wrong things about both of these. They think either A, you need to avoid all tropes and cliches, or B, you need to use them, and that's as far as you think. The reality is that you got to be aware of them, and you have to know how to use them because they're part of the language of storytelling. So that's the thesis of what I'm going to talk about. Before I get to that, I want to talk about channel news and we'll call it news and noise. So I'll talk about some noise. I'll talk about some news. So channel news, not that much is going on, other than I finished another short read for you guys. It's going to be about a 2-hour read, maybe 2.5 hours, depending on how revolted or terrified you are reading through it. It is a full-blown horror. It's sci-fi horror of the Lovecraftian variety, but gorier. And so that's kind of what you can expect. Is Lovecraft, but a little bit extra gore. It's definitely has a sci-fi setting, and there's a lot of psychological stuff that's in it. So I'll be looking to put that out soon. I don't actually have a firm title on it yet, so I'm trying to think. This is one of those cases where I wrote this story without a title in mind, and I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, because I think if you write a story with a title in mind, you write this story to fit the title, and that's obviously not what I did. Whereas after the fact, it's like, can you find a really marketable title that fits the story that you wrote? That's kind of a tough one, right? So Crown of Sight, it all kind of came as one package. I'm like, yeah, it was originally called Crown of Light, but turns out there's another fantasy book called Crown of Light that I didn't do my market research ahead of time. Crown of Light just sounded like a little bit better than Crown of Sight, so I was like, okay. But not only was it like the same title, but the cover was remarkably similar, which was you had like a crown on the cover. This cover is actually better. If you look up Crown of Light, it's an older indie fantasy book, not what I would read, but it has this same sort of cover design, but not nearly as good as mine. Mine is much better. But keep in mind that I don't know. I try. So it's and sometimes in indie fiction, a lot of times you end up with covers that just aren't quite as good as they really need to be. A lot of cover designers have the basics of how to use Photoshop, but they either don't have the aesthetic eye, or they don't have the knowledge to figure out what aesthetics are going to match a genre and how they're going to work out. So it's good if you don't have those kind of skills, you want to hire them out. But it's also good to get an opinion from somebody else. Like, hey, do you like this person's covers? Do you think that they would make a good cover in my genre? Getting a little bit of feedback and help always helps. I usually ask for more feedback with my covers than I do with my writing. So I had a friend on Twitter ask me like, hey, authors like to share stuff and get feedback, but there's risks involved. And I'm like, I don't really ask for feedback before I'm done, because I'm trying to make my product, and having other people's opinion of it is just going to cloud what I'm doing before I'm finished with it. So I tend to I don't have like reader groups or writer groups or anything that I share what I'm doing with. I tend to just go full bore with what I really want to create, and then I see what customers want. And if they buy it and they like it, then I do more of that. And if they don't buy it, then I usually abandon it. So that's why you're not going to see a sequel to Prophet of the God Seed, is that it's just not popular. I think it's a good book. I like it. I liked working on it. A lot of people who read it like it, but that doesn't mean that it's worth my time to continue it, because nobody's reading it. Then there's really no reason to keep writing sequels to something that didn't really catch on to begin with. So yes, Kaku says tropes and cliches are targets for deconstructionists. I will talk about that, because there's a difference between deconstruction and utilizing tropes and cliches to, quote, subvert expectations. Another thing I want to talk about with news, obviously I missed last week. If you're wondering why I missed last week, it's because right before the stream, my kid swallowed a penny. And he's never done anything like this before, and it's never happened before. I have no idea why he put a penny in his mouth, but he put a penny in his mouth and then he swallowed it. So we had to deal with that. And hopefully this won't get to him when he's like 20 years old and somebody will be like, you swallowed a penny when you were 3. We had to do that, go get an x-ray to see where the penny was. Then we had to have him poop into a toddler potty. He normally poops into the normal toilet like a regular person, I guess. So we had to collect the poop and then find the penny out of the poop for several days. So that was an interesting parenting experience, if any of you have ever had to deal with that. So he pooped into, like the little 2-year-old toddler potties that it just kind of catches it in a bowl, put it in a big plastic sack and like go through it. It's so gross. It's like, I feel for people who are like med technicians who have to do stool samples and stuff. And I've worked some really gross jobs, including like at, slaughterhouses and stuff like that. But I really do not like squishing through freshly laid human poop looking for hidden pennies. That was not my favorite task as a parent that I've done so far. So that's why we missed it, but that's what happens. Sometimes things come up, and if you're not, when you're working for yourself, you give yourself permission to miss that. Last thing, I want to talk about some noise news. That's news kind of out in the world that's noisy to get your attention. So the World Health Organization has declared playing video games to be a disorder. They're calling it gaming disorder. And this is something that I think has been coming for a long time now, but it's something that everybody should be a little bit disturbed and upset with, because what is gaming disorder? Well, gaming disorder is playing too many games. And I'm going to explain why this is of interest. Playing too many games compared to what, right? So is it a disorder when you do things which are fun? Like, I'm not aware of a baseball disorder where you spend multiple nights during the week playing in your baseball league, right? It's like, but if you spend multiple nights per week playing World of Warcraft, that's bad. If it takes over your life or it negatively impacts your life, well, lots of things can negatively impact your life if you do them too much, including watching TV. So I actually think, because this is from the World Health Organization, that one of the things you're seeing here is there's interests involved who don't like the fact that people play video games. When you are playing a video game, what are you not doing? Well, you're not watching TV, and you're not reading the newspaper. You're not engaging with traditional noisy media. And games are so engaging, other media can't really compete, in my opinion. Other than books, right? Like, for me, the further I go, I'm only interested in playing games and reading books, and occasionally watching a movie, because passive experiences where I sit there and the information comes at me at a set pace is incredibly boring to me. And also, I'm just very much aware of the devices that go on as you put them through time. Whereas a book, I'm still aware of the devices. I could speed up, I could slow down. Talked about this in a later video. But games are engaging because gameplay is fun. So games are fun to play. And if kids are spending too much time doing things which are fun, that is bad. They need to be doing more things which are not fun. They need to be doing things like going to the bar and buying alcohol. They need to be, watching CNN and taking in that kind of information. The other thing about this is when you measure table, you measure the ruler. And this is what I'm going to talk about at the end of the stream as my logic segment. This is something where when you look at the history of classification of psychological disorders, it's hard to not come to the conclusion that the psychological establishment is a bunch of frauds. It's fraudulent because things which aren't disorders start being disorders, and things which are disorders stop being disorders, not for any new scientific discovery, but because of other things which are discovered. So homosexuality at one time was considered a paraphilia, which means a harmful or not correct attraction, right? Like the same as pedophilia. Now, the old libertarian argument was just that people should be free to do whatever they want to with their own bodies, right? Like it's nobody's business. It's not the purview of the state to decide what adults do with themselves. And so therefore, any kind of acts between two consenting adults should not be illegal. Well, that's transformed into, once they stop making it a paraphilia, then you're free to say, well, it's not anything bad, because otherwise the psychological establishment would have classified it as bad. So recently you've had gender dysmorphia, gender dysphoria, classified as not a mental illness. And that's actually going to be a very interesting fallout as well. Because for that one, the way that trans people gained access to medical treatment was through that classification, through a mental classification of gender dysphoria or gender dysmorphia, where they could get a prescription for hormones or have surgery performed. So now, how do you get a prescription for hormones and have surgery performed if it's not medical? It'll be interesting if that's actually carried all the way through. But maybe it's that the medical classification has outlived its usefulness in the meta-narrative, and so we need to discard it. Meanwhile, gaming has become an actual threat to the establishment. If you guys remember Gamergate, Gamergate never ends. It's always going on. Like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Gamergate. Gamers are the enemy because gamers actually stick together and don't allow the journalistic establishment to dictate what they like and don't like, and they fought back, which was essentially what Gamergate was about. It was about journalistic integrity, including journalists sleeping with game developers and then giving those games positive reviews. That's how it started. Don't believe any of the hype that it was somehow about misogyny. That's a reclassification. That's the non-argument attempt to demonize the other side, make them misogynists, rather than dealing with the core issue, which is that gaming journalism is like an appendix. It's an organ that we no longer have a use for. Independent media has completely supplanted it in all terms of usefulness. I would never read, before I would read an article from, say, Kotaku, and I do visit Kotaku from time to time, I'd probably watch a YouTube video from a gamer that I actually respect and get their opinion on it. Anyway, so it's going to be interesting to see how this falls out. Now, of course, you shouldn't accept this, right? If you are classifying gaming disorder as a disorder, why is crack cocaine disorder not a disorder? Why is marijuana smoking not a disorder? Those things are just drug addiction. Why is, so in other words, you're classifying the thing rather than the behavior, right? So if you have a compulsive behavior towards gaming, that is maybe something that you could work with a therapist, or something that maybe needs to be fixed. But calling it a psychological diagnosable disorder based on the thing it's not in line with everything else that not just the World Health Organization, but the DSM manuals have done historically. So probably you'll see this in the DSM manual, maybe whenever they come out with another one, which is pretty recent, or pretty often now. So that's your noise. I know a lot of you are gamers. Don't believe this hype. Don't let people tell you there's something wrong with you because you like to do things which are fun. Doing things which are fun is called being a human being. And the fact that some things are much more fun than other things does not mean that those things are bad, or that you're bad for doing fun things. If you spend a couple nights a week playing Dungeons and Dragons, this was a moral panic back in the 80s. Kids playing Dungeons and Dragons. Spend a couple nights a week playing Dungeons and Dragons, it's not a big deal. The reason I think the establishment is worried is that when you are doing gaming activities, you're not watching the news, you're not watching TV, you're not engaging in the media play that makes them money. It's a corporate thing, I think. And of course, the government could be in bed with it too. They're always in bed with it together. So let's take a look at some chat, and then I'll give you the lecture on tropes. Starts the super chat. Kaku says, poop penny and Lovecraftian parenting. Yeah. I'm not going to, I finished this book. When did I finish it? I finished it after the poop penny happened, but it was not inspired by the poop penny. Oddly, this is a book I've written since my daughter was born, and I don't know why I was drawn to do horror so much, other than I haven't been able to do it in quite a while. I've been focusing on fantasy, and that's pretty much what I focused on, including a couple of books that I wrote last year and didn't release that are in the fantasy genre. Those maybe will come out this year if I can clean the manuscripts up, get them actually good, make them into good books. But there was something maybe about being hyper tired after having my daughter. I had this very strange dream. Like, I might call the book like Aliens meets Lovecraft. It's not, there's not aliens in it, but it has the feel to me of the movie Aliens, but much more horrific. Which, Aliens had some different, it was an action movie, but it definitely had big horror. So there's action and horror in it, and a lot of, what I like about Lovecraft is the horror that's hovering on the outside of the psyche, the horror that's in you, and that's kind of what the centerpiece of the story is. There's two main characters, one who is insane and one who has a brain injury. And that's a weird thing to start with, but it's something which can create a lot of interesting interactions and creates the execution of the story in a way that's unique. So hopefully people will like it. If they don't, that's okay. It's only a 2.5 hour book, so it's okay. Let's see. I'll check the chat real quick, and then I'm going to get to the lecture. Have you read Throne of Bones? Yeah, I like it. Vox did write it in response to Game of Thrones. I like it probably the same as Game of Thrones. My criticism of it is that there's probably too much story in it. I know that sounds weird, but there's so many different characters and there's so many different little threads. It really is like epic fantasy that it's actually kind of difficult for me to keep track of it all. But it's well executed. The prose is great. The characters are interesting. I love the world building that Vox actually did. He did, each area or kingdom represents some historical value that he's familiar with. So you have these guys from the north who were basically Norsemen, Vikings, Danes, or the Scandinavians, and then you have a group that represents the Roman Republic, and their military is very much like a late Roman military, or late Roman military, and then you have these elvish groups. And then you add goblins in. So you take things from history and then you mix them up with races, and you get a lot of interesting interactions. My favorite epic fantasy, though, is actually probably Malazan Book of the Fallen. So if you haven't read Malazan Book of the Fallen and you actually want a complex story with where the world building is really important, because in Game of Thrones it's really of minimal importance. It's about the characters, whereas I think with epic fantasy that I'm more drawn to, the setting is its own kind of character. So the works of Stephen Erickson, R.A. Salvatore too. I've been reading through the Drizzt series, and I rather enjoy it, so I do recommend that one as well, which I hadn't read before, so I'm having a lot of fun with that one. If you want to know what I'm currently reading. Also, I don't know where I put it. I brought in the book to talk about it, but I read Twilight last week, so I'll do some content on that for you guys. Let's see here. Glitchy Gear, I will get to those questions when I talk about the lecture. Speaking of covers and titles, potential Writestream on names, titles, branding. That's a great idea. That's a great idea, actually. I'm not the best at it. I probably have John Della Rose on, because he's really good at picking out titles and figuring out like log lines, like what's the core idea, how do you get it, how do you get people to have that emotional reaction by the book. He's really good at marketing. He's a great writer too, but he's really good at knowing how to pick the right words in the title and the description to get people wanting to click. Have you read Carrying Comfort by Dan Simmons? I have not. Maybe I'll get to it. I don't know. Let's see here. What do you think critics thought Last Jedi doing nothing but narrative dead ends was a good way to subvert cliches? I'll talk about that. Let's see if there's anything else omitted. Film Girl says, I want to say hi. Hello. What are your favorite steampunk books? Jake Last. I don't know. I'd have to think about it because it's not a genre I read a whole lot of, but it's not a huge genre either. So I don't know. I'll have to think and come up with a list of which ones I've read. I probably can't remember them off the top of my head. I have to go back and look. Archiver says Aquaman and Black Panther. In each film, the hero loses in ritual combat, but somehow escapes, later beating the enemy. Is this plot armor? A little bit, but it has to do with a particular kind of plot point called like the Dark Night of the Soul, which pops up in all kinds of plotting books that you have to have. So it makes the hero very vulnerable and makes you think that he can lose because he does lose, and that his quest is on the precipice of failure, so that then he can overcome that. And of course, what you have with Black Panther is the resolution of that is he re-engages him with ritual combat and defeats him. So he's able to beat him the second go round. Do you think gaming journalists have good writing skills as journalists? No. Generally, no. They don't even talk about the things which matter to gamers. It's kind of interesting, actually. I'd much rather watch a video or watch someone play it and talk about it. You know, I'd rather have all the information. Hey, puppy, what's up? I'd rather have all the information like filtered through a YouTuber, honestly, because they're gonna tell me what's more relevant than gaming journalists these days. They are like an appendix. Like, I guess they're there to pop up on my Google feed, but I don't know what else. Patrick Mouse says, just want to say I watch you, but you start at 3 a.m. here. Still love the channel. Thank you. I'm sorry. This is the time that I can do it, and it's still kind of okay on the East Coast of North America. So that's kind of the time I picked. If I were doing it on the weekend, I would for sure pick a time that's, for me, very early afternoon, like noon. That way, if you're in Europe, Greenwich Mean Time would be 8 p.m. So if you're over in Germany, it'd be 9, 10 p.m., which is totally okay for a lot of people. So I appreciate the super chat, and I do appreciate you watching. I'm sorry it's not at a more convenient time for you. But luckily, YouTube does have replays, so that's good. Scott Linnell, $10. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let me give you the lecture. So here's what you need to know about tropes and cliches. So when you are communicating to someone, you are communicating using language. Language, the meaning of language is not determined by you, right? It's an interface between you and another person. It exists independently of you, which is why when people say they want to redefine terms, that's literally an impossibility. The meaning of words is fixed, but out in the realm of language, and it needs to be fixed, otherwise you wouldn't understand the words that I'm saying right now. So the meaning is not up to me, and it's not up to you. It's fixed between us so that we can actually understand each other. Now, there's a bunch of things that go into stories that have to do with that. Now, I say that, people say, like, well, you're saying language is static and can never change. No, I'm not saying it's static and can never change. What I'm saying is that it's not up to you to determine new meanings of words. That's an impossibility. It can only be determined collectively and in a decentralized manner. That's what's cool about language. And to that end, you actually see language changes very little over time. You can go back and read Shakespeare, hundreds of years old, and the English language holds up. If you recognize the words, you know their meaning. There's just, sometimes there's a lot of differences, but for the most part, a lot of the words have just kind of maintained their meaning because people continue to use them in the same way year after year after year. So anyway, that's not up to me. It's outside there. It's part of the realm. Sorry for my neighbor's bod car. I don't know which one that is. It's a fast car. Okay, so it's got a big engine. So just like how language is out there, so are tropes. Tropes are story devices. They are ways of producing a character, like character archetypes. You could call them cliches. You could call them tropes. It doesn't really matter what term you use. Cliche tends to have a more negative connotation. Cliche is something that you really want to avoid, whereas a trope is something that you should be free to use. Tropes are pieces of that language, and using them will allow people to have a set of expectations, allow people to understand the story more quickly. Just like how if I choose to communicate with someone I'm probably going to choose words that I think the other person knows. That's something. So if I'm talking to my son who's 3, I'm not going to, there's certain things I'm just not going to talk to him about. I'm not going to try to explain monetary theory. All I'm going to do with money is like, when you work, someone pays you money to do work for them, and then you can trade that money for things. And my son's like, but I want things now, Anyway, so the language that you choose to use. So depending on the market, depending on the people you're trying to communicate a story to, tropes are part of that language. They are things that you can use to communicate your ideas to the other person. And part of that is also setting up expectations. Now, if you use nothing but tropes and cliches, you're going to bore a reader. And there's a reason for that. If somebody is saying a sentence you've heard before or just saying information you already know, if I start giving you a lecture on supply and demand, you're going to tune out, you're going to get bored because you already know that information. So in that same way, if you use nothing but tropes and cliches, you're going to bore your reader, you're going to bore your viewer. It's going to become an experience where the reader's not going to be interested. You want to use ones that allow the reader to have some kind of attachment to the story, whether they're aware of you using them or not. And then you can surprise them a little bit, okay? And depending on how you do this, it's going to be more or less effective. People mention Last Jedi. Last Jedi is probably what you shouldn't do. So people are like, oh, it's subverted expectations. Subverting expectations is not necessarily good if the audience is upset and wants their money back because of some attachment they had. So one of the problems was, there's a trope that JJ used in the first movie in Force Awakens that's really from like epic literature. It's starting in media res, in the middle of things, which is how A New Hope starts. A New Hope starts in the middle of the Galactic Civil War. It doesn't give you the background. So it starts in the middle, and there's a bunch of mystery box things. Here's a image of Luke touching R2-D2. What does this image of Luke mean? Well, we're going to find out, right? So you set those things up. It's a trope that lets people know, I need to keep watching your viewing and find the solution to this. I'm going to be interested to find out what the solution is. So JJ Ryan answered those questions in ways that were very unsatisfying to the viewer. And what you want to do is you want to tread the line between surprise and dissatisfaction. Now, it would be surprising if Luke had abandoned everything because he had found some kind of secret ancient Jedi temple that revealed new information about the Force that was different than what we knew, but, he's still a good guy. Rather than, I wanted to murder my nephew in his sleep, but then he kicked my butt, and then everybody turned on me, and so I'm just hiding out here waiting to die, right? That's too much, right? That's way too much. Whether you are into Star Wars or not, you could probably say that's way too much. And for people that are into Star Wars, they're going to hate that. So you really don't want to do things like that. But you do want to surprise them somehow. So if she'd shown up and Luke had been, I'm at this Jedi temple researching these ancient texts, which reveal knowledge of the Force that before had been lost. And the knowledge of the Force has to do with the balance between dark and light. And people will be like, oh, that's interesting. And like why we avoid the darkness and how we can actually, cure someone of the darkness, things like that. I don't know. There could have been so many different ways to reveal that. Or he could have been secretly training a group of Jedi because he felt like, I can't have any knowledge. Like the Republic has to be divorced from me because they were politicizing the Jedi or something. That's the lesson I learned. And then people would have been okay with that too. But the way it was like the Jedi were bad for letting Darth Sidious take over, therefore they should go away. It's like, yeah, but you were a Jedi and you also helped destroy Darth Sidious. So clearly the galaxy needs the Jedi on some level because there's bad guys out there. So let me go ahead and let me see if I can demonstrate a little bit what I'm talking about real quick. When you are dealing with expectations, when you're dealing with a language that's common between people, it's kind of like music, and I've explained this a couple times in other videos. Let me go ahead and I'll tune up here in a second. Here we go. Should have tuned up, obviously, before the stream began. Should have tuned up before the stream began, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So if you're playing in what's called common practice tonality, which is the tonality that was used up until the 20th century when composers like Arnold Schoenberg thought that they knew better, or thought it'd be interesting to create a new tonality from scratch that's atonality and things like that. So basically everything from modal chants all the way up until Wagner, Holst, and after that you start getting the atonalists. That's stuff that exists in keys and in modes. So if you're playing in like a key like C major, there's natural relationships that happen between the chords. I have a long video series on how all of this stuff works, but right now you can just hear it. But if I'm playing a piece, or I'm just going to play some chords. What you're expecting is a resolution that goes back to what's called the tonic. That's a dominant to tonic resolution. Hopefully you can see my left hand here. Now if we're playing through a progression like that, and we play an A minor instead of that C, it's only one note difference. Instead of playing C major, we drop the C to an A, and it becomes A minor. That's called the deceptive cadence, and so that is actually a subversion of expectations. So as we're creating a chord progression, instead of going to where the ear naturally wants it to resolve to C major, we instead go to A minor, and it becomes a deceptive sort of cadence. And that allows us to continue our chord progression all the way through to whatever we want to do with it. And we get even in with the plagal cadence, which is a little bit of a surprise ending as well. So just like when you're composing music, you're dealing with a set of expectations. If you have a melody that's in C major, wants to end back on C. If it goes back up to A or back down to C. So if it goes to a different place than what you expect, you're also subverting those expectations. If you look at music classically, you can actually hear this. So if you go back to the classical period, which was the music that was popular in the 18th century, what you'll find is it's very, very set in form and style. The form and the style is never as concrete in any other period as it is in the classical. That makes the majority of classical period music actually rather boring, at least to me, because it's literally the same things over and over again. The same kind of melodies, the same chord progressions, the same style of accompaniment, the same formal arrangement. So you have like a sonata allegro form. You're supposed to begin a symphony with what's called sonata allegro form, which would be a fast movement, 4 movements to a symphony: fast, slow, dance, fast. That's the arrangement. So not only do you have to stick to the same form in each movement, you also have to have the same set number of movements. As you get towards the end of the classical, one of the reasons we remember Mozart and we remember Haydn is that they did not adhere as strongly to those conventions as other composers at the time. So Mozart adhered to them very strongly, but always had 1 or 2 surprises. Haydn, who wrote over 100 symphonies, there's a really famous one you can look up on YouTube right now called The Surprise Symphony. And I'm not going to play it now, or the stream would get a strike, because that's the way copyright works on YouTube. But if you listen to it, it's got these extremely conventional figures that are just boring as heck. And in the middle of it, there's big surprises. So during a slow adagio, it's these kind of slow chords, and then all of a sudden there's like a big loud chord in the middle of it from the brass to surprise you. So he really subverted expectations, right? He really worked with those expectations to produce surprises. But he didn't abandon the forms. The forms are still there, so the listener knows exactly what to expect, and then you're surprising them. Mozart did a lot of the same things. He would tweak the form just a little bit. So during the what's called the development section of a sonata allegro form, he would do some interesting things like change keys in a Bach-like fashion, which was not actually fashionable in the classical period. But he would do Bach things where he'd put like a little mini fugue in there, some imitation that was rather Baroque-like, and was kind of fancier than what you normally heard coming out of the Galant period, which is the period a little bit before the classical, that his father Leopold Mozart wrote in. So that's what you'd get. Now, by the time you get to Beethoven, you get full-on deconstruction almost of them. Not full deconstruction, but here's the difference between deconstruction and kind of subversion, or really, let's just say challenging expectations. So Beethoven would, if you listen to the Fifth Symphony, it's a great example, very famous one, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. That one has kind of a surprise section in the middle of it. Rather than having sonata allegros usually A section, B section usually in a minor key or the dominant, A section, B section repeated, a development section, A section, B section, end, a coda and end. He stuck extra little sections in there. So there being A section, a B section, and then like an extra little in the middle of it transitional thing, then an A section again, then an extra thing you're not expecting, then the B section again, then a super long, extra complicated development where he goes all over the place, and then finally ends back there, and then a coda that's exceptionally long. So he challenged all of the expectations. He started with the form and then added a bunch of things which were new and different and really caught the ear. So we wouldn't be listening to Beethoven today if he was not rebelling on some level against the tropes. Now, he was using them and he was working against them at the same time. And that's really the balance you want to strike. And that's the way that the style progressed from classical into the Romantic. So that by the time you get to the Romantic period in the early 19th century, you still have some of these forms from the classical sticking around, being used, but you don't have them nearly as set in stone. A, B, development, A, B. You have very, very different ones. Beethoven started having, his Sixth Symphony had 5 movements, which was unheard of at the time. That was a new thing. And it was over 45 minutes long. It was like the longest symphony anyone had ever done. So he's challenging the length, he's challenging the breadth, he's challenging the style. By the time you get to the Ninth Symphony, orchestra is not enough. I have to put a choir into my symphony. And so his Ninth Symphony, usually considered like his greatest achievement as far as symphonies go, which is the fourth movement is the Ode to Joy. That one, right? So that one had a choir in it, which was unheard of as well. So he broke a lot of the rules. Now, in books, you can think of the same thing. And the way I'm thinking of it is that I'm starting with what's successful. I start with what's successful, and then I work backwards from there. Okay? So if you look at Twilight, so I read Twilight last week. So here's what you need to know about Twilight. Twilight uses tropes that are very familiar and very common, but uses them in an uncommon way. And I'll talk about this with some later content that I do. But Twilight is, in essence, a romance novel. However, it's a romance novel with vampires instead of a traditional bad boy. So Edward is just a bad boy archetype. I've talked about that archetype on the channel. But he's a vampire. And then, of course, you fulfill the fantasy of the bad boy actually being good. And so you have that. That's a trope from romance. The way that the relationship develops is it's just a romance trope. The third act, which has a sudden danger and the damsel needs to be saved, that's also a trope. But because it's in a slightly unfamiliar fashion, which is in this vampire romance with high school kids, directed towards high school girls, it's unfamiliar. So it's unfamiliar to the audience who's read it. The 13, 14-year-old girls who were reading Twilight, who helped make it the phenomenon that it is, they were not familiar with romance tropes because they're not reading bodice rippers. So what you have is a bodice ripper that has the sex ripped out and replaced with vampire desire. Ooh, yeah, that's a little bit different, right? But it's the same thing, and all of a sudden it's new. So it's a very, very standard book, but with one thing switched out, and all of a sudden you have a hit. Same thing with Harry Potter. What is Harry Potter? The formula of Harry Potter is Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. It's the magic system is just directly ripped off from Ursula Le Guin, almost to the point where it's like thievery. The only difference is she gives words to it that are based on Latin for whatever reason. Like Latin's like the main language. I would have picked Greek, but you know. So she makes the magic words Latin rather than having them exist in a primal originator language, the dragon language. Personally, I find Earthsea more interesting as far as magic goes. But you take that, put it in a modern setting, and then we're just going to have the escapist trope, which is from Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, through Narnia to today. Regular kid goes into the world of fantasy. That's a trope. You just stick that in there, and then the structure of the book is a mystery format. So it's a mystery book with those two extra things added into it. All of a sudden, it's explosive. There's nothing original. There's nothing new in Harry Potter, just like there's no new words when I'm speaking words. Unless I say, I'm beginning to use a new word. Here's the word. Here's the definition of it. Now I shall use it. When I'm just trying to communicate to you, even when I'm defining it, I'm using words where the definition's already set. So just like that, it's tropes that already exist, but they're arranged in a new fashion, just like how you arrange used and familiar words into new sentences. That's how those two hits ended up happening. And simply because they had that originality to them, at least relative to what was existing at the time for young adult and children's literature, and they came out at the right time, that's what it is. There's a lot of luck in there. And people they underestimate the amount of luck involved. They think if I write a book like Harry Potter, I'll be successful. Maybe, but chances are what you need to think of is how to be original the way that J.K. Rowling was, which is use familiar things that people get attached to, things that which work and people are comfortable with, but use them in an unfamiliar way, which makes them interested in what you're doing. Okay, so that's the lecture, right? That's basically all I have to say about that. It's important that when you're using tropes, you pick and choose the ones you use. You not use too many, and you use them hopefully in a way that's a little bit different than what people are used to. So people have an understanding. They're able to have correct expectations for the book, and you're able to play with those expectations and surprise them a little bit, keep them interested, and more important than that, get them attached to the characters. The reason that people like to use everyman characters is because people live through those everyman characters. They get very attached to them. People love Luke Skywalker. People love Harry Potter. Harry Potter's really an everyman, even though he's abused. He acts like an everyman. He's very vanilla. And so anybody could imagine themselves as Harry Potter. Like, what would I do? You know, I would probably do that. You know, he acts in a very standard way. He doesn't have big personality traits which alter his behavior. He acts just like a normal person. Same thing with Luke Skywalker, and that's why we love him so much. So hopefully that answered Ash's question. No, Last Jedi is not the way that you really want to subvert expectations. You want to do it in a way that the reader is surprised and interested and satisfied. Like if you look at Twilight, everything in there is towards the satisfaction of the reader. It's not to just surprise him because. And that's what soap operas get into, and that's what a lot of modern stuff gets into, is we have to surprise people and keep them interested, otherwise they'll get bored because we can't think of anything new or original to bring into this. So we'll just do the opposite. We'll deconstruction. So deconstruction, to answer that question, deconstruction is when you purposefully try to do the opposite of everything. You purposefully deconstruct a trope. So a lot of times I think modern people don't understand anti-heroes, as an example. An anti-hero is not a deconstruction of a hero so much as it's a hero that doesn't have the standard set of heroic traits. If you were to deconstruct the hero, he would come into a situation where he needed to act heroic, and he would be the villain, or he would act like a coward, and that would just continue. And then at that point, he's not an anti-hero, he's something else. He's just a subverted version of a hero, which is exactly what they did with Luke. They turned him from a hero into somebody completely pathetic and worthless. Are there some tropes of cosmic horror? Well, the main one I used was like the Eldritch Horror from Lovecraft, right? The old god, the ancient horrible thing, the Balrog, right? So this exists in Lord of the Rings, right? Is that buried in the earth are old gods. There are things of the ancient past which could only be overcome by gods and angels. And by accidentally uncovering them, you unwreak havoc and destruction and apocalypse on yourself. That's exactly what happened to the dwarves of Moria in Lord of the Rings, and that's a strong theme in Lovecraft. I don't know if Tolkien ever read Lovecraft, but I think there's something psychically deep about that idea. That kind of like the snake in the Garden of Eden, there's a danger to hidden knowledge. There's a danger to delving too deep. So in my story, that's basically what it is delving too deep on a mining planet. And there's some surprises, obviously. So when you read it, you're going to be like, oh, well, I get this idea of the Balrog, right? But it's different as you go. And it's more horrific as you go. And hopefully there'll be some surprises as you go as well. And I'd like to think that a big portion of the quality of a book is actually in the execution, the micro level. How you actually execute all the little details really can matter a lot. I've kind of gone back and forth on this. I think it's important that people know the big stuff, but the important points of the story you really need to micro correctly as well. Let's see here. Before you start to write a novel, is it more advantageous or disadvantageous to write the whole novel in the form of a movie script? I would just write it as a novel. If you write it as a movie script, you already have the dialogue, and so you can just add the prose. What I've recommended to a lot of people is that if you have trouble with a scene, try just writing the dialogue first. Or if you don't feel comfortable writing the prose, try writing the dialogue first, and that'll direct the way that you want the prose. And as you read the dialogue, there's a flow to reading a book where if you feel like there's too much dialogue in a row, you can interrupt it with some directions. Like, he leaned back against the wall. You can interrupt that flow of just quotation marks. Film Girl says, I think I have the most trouble with picking names for my characters and writing a good blurb. A good blurb is hard. Actually. And there's different approaches. So you can take the traditional approach, which gives basically the details of the exposition, the setup, and then gives you maybe details up to the first plot point. The way John recommended it to me a couple months ago, and I've changed some of my blurbs to do this, and some of them I haven't bothered with, but some of them I've changed. It's where it's all about emotion. It's all about hooking emotion. The bad guy sits upon a throne of human skin. We're like, oh, that's a horrific image, and I want to read this now. So there's two ways to approach it. It just depends on a million factors. You could try both out. It's kind of cool if you're publishing a book on Amazon, is you can change it all the time if you want. What are your thoughts on Ray Bradbury? I like Ray Bradbury. I haven't read a Ray Bradbury story in quite some time, though, but I always enjoy them. That's classic sci-fi and is more about the ideas than the execution of story. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the story execution is generally pretty good as well. My favorite, though, the reason I like 1984 by George Orwell is that not only are the ideas incredibly powerful, but the story is so well executed. It's just a great story, and that makes the ideas that much more powerful. It's just a great fusion of character setting, plot. Plot's great. The characters are great. There's surprises. It's just a great book. It's great. Quiet, honey bun. Shh, 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 shh. I know you heard the dog. Shh, shh, shh. Do you need to go out and bark in the other room? Okay. Sorry, dog barks. I got a little barky dog. She's hanging out with me tonight. Let's see. By the way, if you want me to respond to a chat, make sure you put @David Stuart so I'll see it. Otherwise, I might skip it. Are tropes more prominent in film? I think they are. And I think they are because the format is more restricted. You only have 2 hours. Is a novel about a former Muslim helping Spaniards reclaiming their homeland from the Moors during the Middle Ages a good idea for a novel? What cliches should it avoid? I don't know. I mean, there's a good trope you can use there, which is the person who realizes they're the bad guy, right? If they're for the Moors and they have some... I just... For me, I wouldn't believe a Muslim would convert unless it was some kind of like Road to Damascus style thing. Unless it was like, Christ appeared to him in a vision and told him he was on the wrong side. That I might believe. And then I'd be very compelled about what this book means, this person having to abandon their faith and help the Christians. Jared Wignall, subverting expectations can be a good thing, but if the product isn't good, the subversions won't be good. Though Ryan Johnson doesn't care about people disliking TLG or the subversions. Yeah, I mean, if the part of the product being good is how you execute those things. The devil's in the details. It's not just like, oh, well, you throw in a trope and then you throw it out the window. It's like, no, you gotta do a little more thinking than that. You have to do a little bit more thinking than that. The way Johnson wrote Luke was one of the worst parts. Yep. That's why everyone hated it. Sometimes subversion can be good, like the death of Ned Stark. Yeah. But I'll tell you something about that is that, so Stark's death, I didn't watch the first season. I watched the first couple episodes and it didn't interest me or my wife, so we didn't really continue with it. But reading the first book, when I got to the end of the book, I had no reason to pick up the second book. I think there were only two or three books. 2 books out? 3 books? I don't remember how many books were out when I read it. It wasn't nearly as many as there are now. I think I don't know how many books are out. But anyway, I was just like, okay, the only guy I liked is dead. So I don't really care about what happens now. And so that was the end of my journey. And it wasn't bad. Like, it was definitely surprising. But to me, it seemed like a book that I didn't care anything about sequels. It didn't need a sequel, so I didn't read any. It was okay, though. It was kind of soap opera-y. I said that before. I think subverting the audience's expectations is current Hollywood's favorite trope. Yeah, I think so, too, from the Archiver. Going back to Game of Thrones, I mentioned it's kind of soap opera-y. It's just things happen for the sake of tension. There's no meaning behind what people are doing in a lot of cases. It just kind of, a lot of things felt arbitrary. And it did feel like a Gardner, like a riding by the seat of your pants kind of thing, like Stephen King does. It just isn't always bad. It wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't really near, I'm probably not going to read any of the other ones. Aren't tropes just strategies for achieving specific reactions? Yes. Cliches would be overused or clumsily used. Yeah. From Scott. That's perfect. That's a great way of expressing it. So cliches are bad. Tropes are fine. So a cliche would be it's very obvious or it's used to the point where people don't want to see it anymore. Then it's a cliche. So if you have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a good character cliche now. Would be nerdy guy wants the hot girl. If you do that really awkwardly, it's going to be like such an obvious cliche. But honestly, it's the devil's in the details. If you executed it well, people are going to forgive it. Hey, Mr. Stuart, have you heard that episode 9 would be the end of both the Jedi, Sith, and lightsabers? I haven't heard the one with lightsabers, but yes, I've heard it'll be the end of the Jedi and Sith. It's good. I want Star Wars to go away. Let's be done with Star Wars. Let's have it exit, stage left. Let's play Warhammer or something else. Tropes or cliches can be subverted or used as a sleight of hand quite well in comedy. Oh, yes. Like in Spaceballs or Blazing Saddles for Mr. Roshi. Absolutely. That's what comedy's about. So comedy's about a couple of things, and one is expectations, and the other one is pain, right? So the more painful something is, the funnier it is. Like someone getting kicked in the testicles. It's like, oh, that's so funny. Well, why is that funny to have that kind of pain? Well, because it's not you, right? Or something that's unexpected that happens. I remember watching Hot Fuzz, and this piece of a church fell on this guy and crushed his head, and blood sprayed everywhere. And it was just such a random thing that I couldn't help but laugh. obviously I didn't expect that to happen, so kind of subverted my expectations. And then it was incredibly painful and bloody, which the reaction is laughter. So there's an old saying, there's no laughter in heaven because there's no pain. And there's a very thin line between crying and laughing. And I actually, the sound of crying and laughing are the same. I did a noise piece back, at this point, 15 years ago. And I recorded a girl doing 4 things: laughing, crying, and screaming. Or laughing, crying, screaming, laughing, crying, screaming, and then whimpering. Like she was afraid. Now that one, I wasn't allowed to actually have that one played live because it sounded... The teaching staff thought it sounded too disturbing. That's how I'll put it that way. They're like, this is very disturbing. It sounds like someone being raped. I was like, it's not that, but it is supposed to be fear. So it made people feel really uncomfortable. And anyway, so one of them, I didn't have enough crying sounds. So I just put some of the laughing sounds into the crying track and nobody could tell the difference. Laughing and crying are very close. They sound almost the same. I wanted to ask how much prep you do for your streams. I don't do that much. I think about what I'm going to say for sure. Like, I plan out what I'm going to say. I plugged in a guitar beforehand. I probably could have just grabbed my classical, but I was like, I want to get my old Fender out, play it a little bit. Sorry, chat jumped down. I missed everything. I think one of the tricks is knowing when to use a trope or when to subvert the trope. Yeah, it's all devil's in the details. Isn't everything that's written a trope in some way? Well, you're using language, and the answer is no. So if you read something like bizarro fiction, the point is to avoid tropes and do things almost randomly. Nothing makes sense. No expectations are adhered to. There's no sense of rhyme or reason. That's what you end up with, is bizarro fiction. And there's a certain quality to bizarro fiction that I can understand. I really like your energy for Beethoven, so I feel bad for asking something else about storytelling tropes. I feel like WoW Vanilla used a lot more cliche stories than BFA or Legion, but I remember Vanilla more. Secret Dragon Lady, Villainous Robin Hood. Yes. This is another... Why do you prefer the tropes? The tropes often... Not just that they're effective. They often tap into deep psychological and spiritual meaning in ways that you don't think, right? Like a messianic kind of figure, obviously there's highly religious significance. There's not just Jesus, but like in Buddhism, the idea of like a messianic figure is a powerful idea. If you have a Robin Hood kind of figure, well, what's the meaning behind Robin Hood? Well, it's rebelling against tyranny. It's being an outlaw because that's the good thing. And I know you're thinking of Van Cleef, and he's really a bad guy, but if you go through the entire story before you go to Deadmines, you end up with a sympathy for Edwin Van Cleef, where he really was... He really turned to be an outlaw because him and the other stonemasons were mistreated after the rebuilding of Stormwind. And the nobles in Stormwind really are kind of at fault. And when that finally ends with the assassination, where you get the Seal of Ren, I mean, it's just such a great and satisfying story. And part of what makes it satisfying and memorable is because it takes a long time to do. It takes a lot of effort to do. And you had to read the quest text in vanilla because you didn't have a quest helper to tell you, go over to the highlighted area on your map and click 3 things over there. All right. You had to read it. You had to figure it out. You were deeply engaged with the stories in a better way. So part of it's execution. Part of it's the fact that these tropes have deeper meaning. I mean, really, the Defias Brotherhood goes all the way to Onyxia. It's pretty cool. It's pretty in depth, and it just kind of flowed out of the setting kind of naturally. What about the Shakespeare reference? Nothing else but mad as a title for your new book. That wouldn't convey the genre right. I appreciate this. I appreciate that, but if you're thinking sci-fi horror, it's got to be something like Mountains of Madness. It's got to be like The Depths, right? Something like that. It's got to convey the genre a little bit. And if it was something like space, like Dead Space as a video game title was just perfect. It just conveyed the game. It was the game, Dead Space. So it's got to be something like that. You can pick Greek because everyone else already picks Latin. No need to be more original than you have to. Am I right? Yeah. The reason I like Greek is that it was the lingua franca of the New Testament. So that's more people spoke Greek than Latin. I thought Quidditch was the NW. I don't know. New word in Harry Potter. Quidditch. It sounds like cricket. I don't know. I don't know. It is a new word. You're right. George Lucas was able to bring tropes that people were familiar with. Yeah, he intentionally did that. But he also kind of surprised you in ways too, especially with Empire Strikes Back. What I really liked about Harry Potter is how J.K. Rowling revealed more and more of the magic world as the story goes on. Yes, but she never reveals the whole thing. She always holds something back so there's something new and interesting to do. That's one of the great things about the series, is that each book there's something new for you to engage with the setting. And I feel that a lot of fantasy books actually fail horribly at this, is that as the series goes on, things get a little boring because you're no longer having that, what's the next revelation of the setting? Like if you're reading the Vampire Chronicles after the third one, the setting, the idea of vampires, it's just not as interesting as it is in those first three books, where you're uncovering clues about how the vampires work. So, I could say that actually with like most Brandon Sanderson novels. The first one of a series is always really good because of the way it interacts with his high quality setting that he designs. But then as it goes on, it gets less and less interesting. And it's because he just doesn't write characters that are as good as some other writers. That's kind of what I decided. And so after you figure out the setting, you're just not as interested in the way things play out. It's kind of one of the things I noticed. It's not that he's bad at that. It's just like his settings are such a unique part, and they're so exposed well in the first book that you kind of just need to have faster paced book 2, 3, 4 and get on with the action. I kind of felt that with the Wheel of Time too. By the time you get to book like 7, 8, 9, it's like it's not very good, dude. It's boring because nothing's happening and you're not learning anything new. You kind of nothing new is revealed that was so interesting in the first 4 or 5 books, 6 books, or even. What are your thoughts on enigmatic characters? I like them. One of my favorites is Vampire Hunter D, and I've read the novels as well, the light novels. Yes, I'm revealing a bit of my nerdiness. So I like that. You never quite have him figured out, which means he always feels more powerful than he is, maybe, and also you're just waiting for some detail to give a clue as to like who the hell he is. And even when he kills somebody, they're like puzzled. They're like, "Who the hell are you that you're able to kill me?" It's like, he's a very powerful dude. More like a paragon. Vampire Hunter D is the guy who usually solves the problem with the plot. He's not like the main. He doesn't. If he was an archetype, it's an enigmatic character archetype, and it works pretty well. Kind of like Marius or something, or in Vampire Chronicles. Now that I'm thinking about those, Piglet looks quite happy. Yeah, he's having an apple. In case I get hungry. It's good. Granny Smith apples are my favorite. If you want a good deconstruction of wuxia kung fu films, check out The Blade from 1995. I think I saw that. Yes, One-Armed Swordsman. I think I saw that. But I don't remember anything about it. I think it was a while ago. What kind of dog do you have? She's a Maltese. Do you want to go in the other room? I'm going to let her out. Let me move the guitar case. There, you can go bark. Go have fun. Silly little dog. Have you seen American Graffiti? What are your thoughts on it? Well, I live in Modesto, so it reminds me a lot of home. Modesto is still a lot like American Graffiti, man. And in fact, there's a place that there's different places that are kind of just based in the book that are still around in Modesto, including like Fast Eddie's Meal on a Bun, which is like the drive-in. Your thoughts on, and American Graffiti is good. It's a well done film, and I like American Graffiti as an example of, they did the movie the way they wanted to on a low budget. Him and Gary Kurtz, rather than submit to studio control, they were more interested in the artistic expression, and that's kind of George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola. There's a reason that they don't really set up shop in Hollywood. They do it outside of Hollywood. Your thoughts on Foundation? I read the first book. I don't know what that is. I probably should, but it doesn't ring a bell right now. Which is the better dystopian novel, 1984 or Brave New World? I like 1984 better as a novel, but which one is... But I like Brave New World a lot. So Brave New World, I feel like is closer. It's closer to home, actually. 1984, it's the ideas are kind of abstract and put in a place that's so different from our own world. It's hard to see exactly how you get there. But with Brave New World, I feel like it's just a little... it feels like it could be so much realer, I love both, though. They're great. There's a reason that those have stuck around. Those and Fahrenheit 451 and others have been forgotten. The historical El Cid fought on both sides of the Reconquista as a mercenary, finally turned to the side of Christ at the end. Now that would be a very interesting story there. You're right. El Cid had a personal rivalry with the King of Leon, which resulted in his not always being on the Spanish side. Interesting. Yeah, I would have to... I know the figure. I'd have to do more reading on it. I don't know everything. I thought of a guild name for you in Vanilla WoW, but the Twitch streamer Asmongold already took it for the beta. Make Azeroth great again. I'd probably pick something a little closer to home. We might pick our old classic guild name from when we played Classic, which was Phantom Elite. I don't think I'll resurrect Cadre Quietus, but we'll see what we figure out. I'm sure I'll do something. I don't know if I'll run a guild or we'll have a leveling guild and then we'll all join something to raid. I don't know what we'll do. I know I have a couple of friends from back in the day that are going to play with me. One of my favorite comedies is What Did We Do in the Shadows, full of vampire film tropes and cliches. Another one I liked was Shadow of the Vampire, which was very interesting the way he did it. Is he really a vampire or is he not? Game of Thrones isn't about Ned Stark, it's about his children. Maybe. What is the most affordable way for an independent writer to get their book edited? Most affordable way. To edit it yourself, right? You could be part of a writing group where you guys, if you're thinking structural edits or general feedback, where you trade edits. But you may not be up to the task of editing other people's stuff. You can also find editors on the market that will do it for you. I will warn you, though, that there's a catch-22 there, which is if a writer is offering editing services, it's because he's not making enough money as an author. And that's one of the things. I don't offer editing services. I kind of decided if I was at a point where I was wanting to edit books for money. People have wanted me to edit their books, but I don't want to do it because I don't want to be a book editor. I want to be a book writer. And so as soon as you start down the dark side, forever will it dominate your destiny. Forever will it dominate your destiny. That's the problem. It's a catch-22 is that you're always hiring an author that's less successful than you want to be to do your editing for you. Some people are just editors, but they're kind of rare, and usually editing is very expensive. So I don't know. I don't know of a great affordable way. It's either you can be part of a writer feedback group to get the general stuff and then pay someone for proofreading. That's probably the most affordable way to do it. And then you're going to save money because proofreading is a lot cheaper than full editing, like structure editing, the full story feedback loop, which is what most people do for editing. So just to reiterate, editing is not what people think it is. So proofreading is where you're correcting typos. Editing is where you are telling the person what to change about their story in a big on a big level. Copy editing is where you're worrying about style and some grammar things, right? Sometimes if you're doing copy editing, proofreading comes with it. But there you go. By the way, most editors don't have a lot of skin in the game, meaning they don't have any downside when they don't do a good job. They mainly are going to tell you a bunch of things to change so that you feel justified paying them money. Sorry. Another reason I don't edit stuff. I want Star Wars to go away. I don't watch Game of Thrones. The producers of Game of Thrones, Spinoff and Weiss, have been tapped by Disney to create the next 3 Star Wars movies. I don't know how to react to that, man. I heard that. I don't know. Presumably they did a good job producing shows that the source material was already created for them, because lots of people like those first Game of Thrones seasons. So they could be a great choice as long as they're not doing the screenwriting. You know, if you hand the screenwriting over to somebody who's good, then it's going to be, it has potential to be great, right? Because I think the problem with Game of Thrones, or part of the problem with Game of Thrones, is that you just have, you didn't have that source material really set out for them to do their thing with. Time for some tea, guys. I'm done with Rockstar. Film Girl, I'm thinking of writing a detective book series, which I might later adapt into a screenplay. Not sure yet. Do you have any tips? I like detective stories. So detective stories are all about presenting a field of evidence that makes the reader think of many possibilities. And the detective, you can go 2 routes. One is the detective, you don't know what he's thinking, which is Sherlock Holmes, or the more noir, which is you do know what he's thinking and he's puzzling through the story just as you are as a reader. Personally, I'm kind of more of a fan of the noir. And so when you put together a mystery, you're going to have events which are unexpected or unexplained, but have just enough context for a reader to think about what's possible and to maybe have a suspicion. And you can also have the character voice a suspicion that will help the reader. It's like, I found a note from Mike in her math textbook. And maybe it's like a murder victim. Let's go talk to Mike. And Mike is like, yeah, I just left her a note in class. I had no idea that she got murdered. And it's like, you really had no idea she got murdered? Well, you wouldn't mind me looking at your phone. It's like, oh, you called her, or something like that, right? So you put in enough context where people create suspicions. But whenever you're writing a mystery, you have to know how things go in the end. I don't think you can write a mystery book without plotting it out ahead of time. So a lot of the quality of mystery, again, is in the execution of those micros. So when the event happens, it's giving just enough context for the person to want to keep reading to figure out if they're right or not. Is it normal to be unmotivated when writing about topics that I have little interest in? Absolutely normal. I can easily write about things I'm passionate about, but struggle to even finish most college reports. That is completely normal. I've done that too. So when I was in college, I would generally write things the night before, because I hated writing essays. They were stupid. Unless I was writing something I was actually interested in, I never wrote it until it was like due. Now, keep in mind, I never got less than an A on any essay that I ever turned in. So I could totally sit down at my computer the night before, pump out 5,000 word essay, proofread it, and turn it in and get an A. That was me. But I also had I always had like an A average on every test thing that I ever did. I'm a very good test taker. It's something I'm actually very good at for whatever reason. Natural talent, maybe, I don't know. But so I always did that because I hated writing it. So the amount of time I spent working on something, if I was working on something I didn't care about, it was like torture. So I'd rather torture myself for 5 hours and whatever, or than like spend 10 hours casually writing the rough draft and trying to revise it and do all the other things that all the good students who got worse grades than me did. That's the worst too. So when you tell people like, oh, I wrote that last night and I got 100% on it, and they get real mad. They're like, I spent like 40 hours writing this essay and I got a B. And I'm like, what can I tell you? You're just not as good as me. I always hated being that guy. And same thing, if you ever had teachers that graded on a curve, I had several classes where it's like they just didn't count me because I got 100% on every test. So it's like, yes, David got 100%. The next one down is the person who sets the curve, which is usually like a 92%. I met my wife in music theory class when I was 19, I think. And she's like, I would not have passed any of those classes if I didn't take them with you. That's how she'll admit it. And she's super talented singer. The laughing and crying are the masks for Greek tragedy and comedy from Immortal Pain. Do you think that is because they recognized how close those two emotions are? Absolutely. And they're kind of inverses, right? They're inverses, but they come from the same source. That's very classical. Crazy Chameleon. Since Hollywood has given up on great scores, is it possible for streaming movies or indie films to produce great scores? Absolutely. What a great comment. Thank you, Crazy Chameleon. Not only is it possible, now has never been a better time because we have access to samples and all kinds of other things. So let's play a song. Let's play one of my songs here. See if you guys can hear this. Is it going to go? Or is it going to lag? So I can produce a score. I could produce a very unique and very close to orchestral sounding score. All right, here we go. You can hear this, right? So there's a bunch of orchestra parts in this. They're all sampled. And if you're clever, you can tell. But in the context of a movie where you have a bunch of other sound design stuff going on, synthetic orchestra hits playing like dissonant scores, you're not gonna be able to tell the difference. But I've had several people contact me wanting me to write scores for like their short films and things like that, and I've had to turn them down because I haven't had time this year. But it's something I could do, So those aren't real violins. This is an iwi. This is an electronic wind instrument. It's not a real oboe. It's just a sample. Actually, it's an English horn. It's not a real English horn, it's a sample. I'm gonna put my iwi. Hold on. You guys listen for a second. And see, I use a lot of synthetic stuff mixed in, so you can't quite tell everything, right? They're like all the drums are electronic. I have an electronic drum set over here. So the instrument you're hearing is not a real English horn, it's this, playing an English horn sample. This is the EWI 5000. It's a great instrument. Love it. If you're not a wind player, it's gonna be awful to play. But if you play saxophone or clarinet, which I play saxophone and clarinet, then this is great. You're so much better expression than using a keyboard. I have a keyboard over here. Much better expression than using a keyboard to play something like an oboe line, like what you hear here. Okay. So this is, I use this and my keyboards and my samples with Ableton Live, and you can use Contact. There's all kinds of great sampling software. You can produce something that's a pretty good quality score on your own if you're talented. I have a friend who does movie scores basically on his own without an orchestra. His name's Robert Allaire, that I went to school with. Here's my metal clarinet. That was in the same bag. So here's a metal clarinet from 1918. It's a 100-year-old clarinet, guys. There you go. So I do play clarinet. This is a cool instrument. I don't know if I ever did a video on this, but if you guys want a video on the EWI, I will do one on the EWI. All right, let's turn that down. So yeah, you could produce a high-quality score. I could produce a high-quality score given time and resources without having to go to an orchestra. And if I needed orchestra work, I could hire the San Francisco Symphony like down the road, or I could probably get the San Francisco. What could I get? I'd probably get the Conservatory Orchestra to record it for a much lower fee than what you get in Hollywood. Or, George Lucas always used the London Symphony Orchestra, or I should say, it was always used with the Star Wars films. and that's one of the best orchestras in the world. But if you are not writing highly complex technical stuff, which John Williams was doing a lot of, you could easily use a college orchestra, and in context it'll sound great. You have to remember that people are not always hearing the details that they would hear in a Star Wars movie. It depends on the movie. Anyway, sorry for that diatribe. I wish I read the quest more. Stockades would have been more fun, from George. Yeah, Stockades is cool. All the classic stuff is so cool. Just such an attachment there. You feel like you're part of the world. The world exists independently of you, and so it's so much more fun to explore. My idea for the novel was more philosophical. The main character is a follower of Averroes, Islamic Aristotelian, but discovers that type of thinking is more suited for Christianity. Interesting. I'm interested. The Thing, best cosmic horror title. Yes, The Thing. That's why I was thinking of something like The Deep, The Depths, right? The Horror Below. Things like that. I am working on a cover design for it. I'll reveal the cover design and the title later. I'm already designing a cover because I have some images in mind that I want to communicate that's going to really, I think, hit the genre nicely and really stand out in the right way. When we're designing covers, same thing. Use tropes to communicate the genre, and then otherwise use things that stand out. Why are dragons so frequent in fantasy? Because they exist in medieval literature. St. George and the Dragon. They're just old. They exist in all kinds of mythology, so they're an easy addition. It's something that is ancient, powerful, hard to overcome. Makes a lot of sense like that. So they're a great addition. They're a trope that people like. It's something that you know right away. If you put a dragon in it, dragons are not easy to kill. So there you go. Let's see here. The vampire hunter dude abides. What character archetype would someone like Guts from Berserk be? Hero, anti-hero, or otherwise? He is a hero. I mean, he's a classical hero. He's kind of like Odysseus. Odysseus is fighting against the gods themselves to get home to his wife. And that's Guts. And I love Guts. He's just a great character. He's unrelenting. He's on a quest for knowledge of himself and the world, but as he hardens himself, he becomes a true hero. He's really not an anti-hero. The first couple books, he's closer to an anti-hero, but definitely as it goes on, he's just a hero. He's a classical hero, like from a classical epic. What are your thoughts on Bram Stoker's Dracula? I like the book. I haven't read it in a long time, but I enjoyed it. I remember Coppola once saying Lucas was actually a better director than both himself and Spielberg, but due to him focusing on Star Wars a lot, many won't see that. I could see that. There's also what you're good at and what you like to do. And George really liked to deal with big ideas and big concepts and leave the execution of the movie to people who are competent at that. That's why, Ron Howard did Willow, and it's great. He had... I don't remember who directed Empire Strikes Back off the top of my head. Initially, he didn't want to direct Phantom Menace. He wanted Spielberg to do it, but it didn't work out. We could have ended up with a really different movie. Do you think that all the remakes now, do you think that we'll get a remake of the 1979 film The Warriors? I don't know. Because you're going to remake the things which have an inbuilt fandom. Back to the Future will be the next. They'll remake that. They'll remake... Let me think what other stuff we're probably going to see a remake of. We will see a remake of the original trilogy, like, for sure. The question is, how long are they going to take to do it? There'll be a big failure, maybe. Like, if Last Jedi really bombs, they might just remake it. They might, like, 2 more movies and remake the original trilogy in, like, some new way. I don't know. It's hard to think about which ones they're really going to think about remaking. Is it usually better to make your main character attractive, average looking, or unattractive? Average looking is better. Most people don't view themselves as beautiful, but if you want to carry somebody's like role play experience, Bella from Twilight's a great example. So the book starts and you don't get the impression that she's pretty. Now, she never says she's ugly, but she focuses on physical traits that maybe somebody would be self-conscious, like she has really pale skin and like dark hair and dark eyes or something, right? So that's something that, like, all the pretty girls are blonde and I'm a brunette, right? That doesn't make a girl not pretty. And in fact, she figures out she's very beautiful as all the boys want to get with her, like pretty much right off the bat. There's like a little love triangle. And then she gets with Edward, and Edward's like, you're so beautiful. So in that case, it starts off as average, but you revealed it to be attractive. And that's the way most people think about themselves. Most people don't wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and go, damn, I'm hot. Even people who are incredibly attractive, and I've known people who are unbelievably attractive, don't see it. My wife considers herself average looking. I'm not going to give you her measurements, but let's just say they're nice, okay? She's never been overweight or anything, right? And she has big, beautiful blue eyes. My wife is very beautiful, but she doesn't view herself as that. Most people don't. It's because you're self-conscious, and you're always going to be trying to compare to something external, which you view as a standard. So, if I look at myself, I might be like, I'm like an average-looking dude. And when people say I look like someone, it's either Kevin Smith or it's like Russell Crowe, and I'm like, the thinner I am, the more I look like Russell Crowe, and I'm like, yeah, I actually am pretty attractive. I'm a pretty good looking dude. I'm definitely above average as far as the middle of the road goes. Obviously, there's going to be dudes who are. If I'm comparing myself to somebody who's like in perfect shape, obviously I'm not there. But that's, it's part of being normal. Most people aren't going to wake up in the morning and view themselves as super attractive. They're going to look at their flaws first. They're going to look at their face and be like, I have a pimple, I feel embarrassed, rather than like, I have a perfectly symmetrical face and perfect skin tone, and then I have a pimple, right? It's human nature to focus on the flaws. Did you ever share one of your outlines on stream? I did. My outlines are lighter than most people's outlines, but I do give information on how to do a more detailed outline. I just tend to, because everything kind of just stays up here and percolates all the time, and I don't need as extensive a note system as some people do. I get the big things on paper that I tend to forget, which are names and like units of currency, names of places. I write that stuff down. I write down the big plot points just to make sure it makes logical sense, and then I just start writing, and I don't look at the outline too much after that. I write the outline because of the process. Interview with the Vampire was a good film. I really enjoyed it. I like the books. The first 3 books are very good, in my opinion. Very, very good. I really, really like them. After that one, they're not bad, but they don't have the same allure. There's a homoerotic subtext going through all of it too, and that's very interesting to interact with too once you're aware of it. You're like, I think these guys, there's like a kind of a homosexual thing between all these dudes, but I'm still so intrigued, even though I'm not gay, right? I don't know how to react to this. Was expecting rueful disappointment because the two things you don't want to see are melding into a Frankenstein monstrosity. How would you go about writing an enigmatic character? Well, make all of the things about him, first of all, write in a third person, or have the enigmatic character not be the viewpoint character. So the enigmatic character can't exist in the first person, because otherwise all the secrets are revealed. So you have him in the third person, and what you're going to reveal are things which are unexplained and things which also clue into power on some level. So if somebody has like a scar right here, you're going to always wonder how they got that scar. Or like Nick Fury missing his eye. Turns out a kitty scratched it. Spoiler alert. So you have things like that. You can choose a name which doesn't reveal a lot. It's like, what's your name? D. Vampire Hunter D. What's your name? D. Is D for Dracula? Or is D for, what is D for? Well, we know that in Bram Stoker's Dracula, Dracula signed his letters as D, if I remember correctly. That's it. That's where he gets it from. And I know that Vampire Hunter D was inspired by Christopher Lee Dracula movies. But like you just don't know how old is he? You have a couple clues. So if let's say, you look at the execution of Vampire Hunter D, you have a character react like, I remember you saving me when I was a boy, and that guy's an old man. And he says, it's true, you don't age. So you have this question. How old is D, right? So you set up questions that you don't immediately have answers for, and then you want to prolong giving those answers as much as possible. Because as soon as you answer them, the character becomes familiar. And if the character becomes familiar, they're no longer a vehicle for that questioning wonder, and you have to find something else to carry that. Do you think big game streamers will have a negative impact on Classic WoW? I don't know. Green tea, ice, and lemon is one of the healthiest drinks. That's exactly what I'm drinking. Yeah, this is a cold brewed green tea, actually. So I put the green tea in a big milk jug and then toss out the leaves afterwards. You could just use matcha, which is like ground up powdered green tea that they like in Japan, and just cold brew that if you want to. But that's what this is, with some a little lime juice and some lemon. Yeah, tastes great. It's naturally sweet, so you don't have to add any sugar to it, and it's just great. Full of good stuff is what I hear, but I just like to drink it. So right now I drink like 2 or 3 cups of green tea every day, 2 to 4 cups of tea every day. Black tea. I drink a lot of tea now. I don't like coffee, but I like tea, so that's what I drink. And I brew it strong when I need to wake up. But this doesn't have a lot of caffeine in it. When you cold brew it, it's low in caffeine, but it's a little bit sweeter than if you do it normal hot brewing. What would be your origin story as to why the Jedi Order was created, or how it started as an order? The ancient lore of the Sith. I would say that like the Sith, I would have it actually start with the Sith, and like the Jedi or the rebels to the Sith. That's how I do it. Just like originally was the Sith, and then there were some people who, had belief that the Sith was bad because they were conquering everything. That's why there's an ancient Sith planet. There's a lot of stuff like that. To me, that would be very compelling. Nitaku. I love using the noir detective in a few stories. For instance, one is a paranormal mystery. We're on a case, he accidentally stumbles upon something far darker than he can imagine. Yeah, that's kind of a Lovecraftian thing too, which I love as well. I love noir for that reason, is that you can really paint kind of a dark picture, and you can really focus on the emotion when you have kind of a first person perspective, and you follow like one dude trying to figure something out. What would be effective ways of explaining God's lack of action through part or all of the story in a horror story about a supernatural or cosmic evil? That's a good question. So in Lord of the Rings, it was that it was not really permitted to appeal to the gods for help with something that was not of the gods. So the gods came and threw Morgoth out, but we had to have the lesser. We couldn't have the Valar. We had to have the Maiar, the lesser gods, the lesser angels, come and help against Sauron. And even then, Gandalf had to bind his power in the Veil of Man. So that's how Tolkien did it. How I would do it is, the way that I'm kind of doing it is, these things were already imprisoned by gods, essentially in the past, an ancient race of angels or whatever, right? And those things have since passed away, meaning they've left or they've moved on, and it's up to man to make his own destiny. Or you could say that, like, the creator doesn't bind himself in the natural world, whereas those who oppose him because they wish to conquer the natural world have bound themselves in it. So if the cosmic horror is bound to the physical flesh, then the physical flesh ought to overcome it, meaning people ought to overcome it, and therefore appeals to God are appeals to the wrong power. he's probably not going to help you unless you're dealing with the supernatural specific part of it, like a godlike opposition. Or God's actions are more enigmatic than that. He doesn't come down like Manwë doesn't come down and blast Sauron off the face of the earth. I used programmed drums for my last EP I put out. 4 songs of instrumental guitar. Awesome. Yeah. Send me an email, and I'd like to maybe hear what you did. It might be cool. Yeah. So I didn't use. I usually play my drum parts in on an electronic drum set, and they come out as a MIDI thing, and then I can tweak them from there. There's just something about actually physically playing the parts that's kind of important to me. Thanks. I was thinking of making him a noir-style detective, follow-up and film girls thing. I was thinking of having an overall mystery throughout each book that needs solving, and then having smaller cases in between. Yeah, that's a great format. That's Harry Potter, but there's wizards. Same thing with. So what is the Dresden Files? It's Harry Potter, but a detective. Because they're both mystery book formats, so it's just Harry Potter but grown up. He's already graduated from Hogwarts. That's the Dresden Files. Have you ever played pen and paper? I'm guessing you mean like D&D. I've done it online. So I've done D&D and GURPS and stuff online using OpenRPG, which was an older program. Now probably no one uses it, and they use other stuff. It's still lots of fun, but I think it's better in person. Now, I worked on some game design, and if any of you out there are computer programmers, especially if you're good at programming mobile apps, I got a friend who might do this with me, but it's just good to know if people are wanting to do any game design work. I have an idea for a game, and I've already designed a lot of elements to it, like the architecture for it, and then design the actual content. But basically, I'll put it this way. It's like automated D&D. The app is on your phone, and so the point is that you play not online, but you play physically with another person, but you don't have to get out a bunch of dice. You don't have to sit around and you don't have to have the slow pace of a D&D game. It goes at a little faster pace, and then there are some other things that make it more interesting too. So you have a new game, and the point is to facilitate the social interaction and get the game out of the way and allow you to role play and get through your actions quickly and in a fun way, because I think that's actually the thing that holds a lot of people back, is sitting around with pen and paper trying to figure out systems, and why people can just jump into something like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy and have a great time. All the system calculations happening in the background, and the player doesn't have to worry about it unless they're a power user. So when you automate things, you have the option of, I want to know everything and I want to control it, versus I'm just casual and I just want to play. And you have both. Have you considered doing review requests at the cost of a fee, like between $30 to $50? I do not do reviews. So I can't actually post reviews on Amazon. I could lose my account because I'm an author. It's not allowed. And I would never charge a fee to do a review because that puts the wrong skin in the game. So I don't do reviews, and you can't get one from me. You got to earn them the old-fashioned way, which is by advertising or getting readers to read it. Just put it out there. I could share your story on social media and say, hey, here's a story. You could read it if you want. Give Ash some feedback. But I can't do a review for you. I know it's like you're trying to pay for advertising or promotion. That $30 to $50 would buy you so much more Facebook or Amazon advertising. There's no reason to pay me to do something like that. Okay. So just so you know, it's just not worth your money either. So even if it's a great book and I'm giving it a great review and I'm giving it exposure, thousands of people see the video, you're going to reach like 10,000 people with traditional ads. So it's better to spend your money on the traditional ads, actually. My 120 has killed multiple dragons, and that's part of why WoW sucks now. Everyone is too overpowered. Yeah, everyone's the hero. Did you know there's a trilogy of sequel books for Willow? I didn't know that. Thank you for letting me know that. Robert Zemeckis has said he won't let them remake Back to the Future. It's not up to him. Eventually he will die, and then it shall be remade. Remember that there wasn't a Ghostbusters reboot until Harold Ramis died. Corporate IP, man, it never goes away. It will ruin everything that you love, because artists love their art like their children. George Lucas said this. He's like, they're like my children. They're my characters. I created them, and I sold them to white slavers. And people were super upset about that comment. But if you've ever created something, that's what it's like. It's like he sold his children, and he's watching them just be like destroyed. The art that you did. It's why he made American Graffiti on a low budget, so he could make the movie he wanted to make. Artists care about their art in a way that corporations cannot. Corporations only view it as an asset to recover money from, an asset that needs to gain them value. Just like a machine that cuts the corn. It's like, well, you buy this machine so that it harvests the corn, and therefore the machine makes you money. That's how they view IP. They don't view it as an artist, and you're going to be continually disappointed for all time until you realize the fact that a corporation will never produce art for the sake of producing good art, ever. It is always going to view whatever intellectual property it holds as an asset to recover money from. Year in review. When writing a trilogy, how do you keep the second book interesting? The world has already been explored in the first book, and the conclusion doesn't come till the third book. Well, I would say let more of the world be explored in the second book. Make sure the first book doesn't contain all the secrets. And then make sure that the second one has some sort of big, important cadence. It has some sort of resolution. It has something big that happens that makes you want to see the next one. Like Luke Skywalker's hand gets chopped off, right? That's a good one. Or Anakin's hand gets chopped off. The war begins, whatever it's going to be. You have to have some kind of big cadence at the end of the second one. Otherwise, people won't watch it. The second Stormlight Archives book, the cadence is the only reason to read the book. Most of the book is incredibly boring until you get to like the last 250 pages where all the stuff happens and the war begins, and then it's interesting. And then Oathbringer is also boring until the end. I'm very disappointed with how those books turned out. I'll talk about them some other time. What about the titles "The Day the Abyss Gazed Back," "The Night the Abyss Gazed Back" for your book? Those are good. I might go with something shorter though. Right? Like just the abyss gazes back. Get rid of like the day or night thing, because that sounds a little pulpy. Like, nothing wrong with that. That's just not this story. This story's Lovecraft. So it'd be like the abyss gazes back, or the view from the abyss. Those are all good ones. Words like abyss, deep, dark, the depths, the void. Gazing into the void. Those are all good psychological words. So those are all good suggestions. I appreciate that. So yeah, abyss is a great one. When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. That's Nietzsche. Dumbest reason for him to lose his eye, Nick Fury. Everything has to be a joke. That's how they view it now, though. Ever see Amadeus? Yes, it's a good movie, but apparently they ripped the music off from some dead dude. It's totally historically inaccurate, but it is a good movie. It's a well-made movie. Let's see here. Archiver. Classic Disney films have a simple plot. I enjoy them better than Disney's modern films. I think this is mainly due to the extensive use of age-old tropes. That, and actually their old stuff wasn't constructed via having a coherent plot. You can just look at Sword in the Stone as an example. They actually constructed a set of scenes. And that's how they built the movie. They just built the movie as a set of scenes and songs. And it turned out fine. What was weird is when they made Black Cauldron, they switched to actually plotting things, and it almost ruined them. But it ended up being the way that they wanted to do things going forward. So the classic Disney films they're literally a collection of scenes and set pieces that are strung lightly together. And that's why people remember them fondly, is because rather than the plot having to have a big effect, each scene just has an emotional impact and you remember it. Kind of like Roald Dahl books. Roald Dahl books have very simple, or even in some cases nonsensical plot. Bad plot. No plot in some cases. But they had these individual scenes which are very memorable and very funny, and that's why people like them. So it's an example, the individual scene might be more important than executing the plot. you know. Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, exactly. That's how those are constructed. Each individual scene is good. Would you consider writing a novel like Muramasa, but it takes place in a different period of Japanese history? Perhaps before there was even samurai, like the Kofun period? The Kofun period, or like, even if you went high-end period, those are interesting. I'm just not an expert on them, so I'd have to do a lot more research, but I totally would. There's a lot of cool stuff to be explored. I think picking Muromachi period or Warring States period, which, you know, it's at the beginning of the Warring States period when I wrote Muramasa. I think 1511 was the year I wrote it in. That carries with it a bunch of tropes that people are familiar with that they want to interact with. The samurai tropes, you know, Bushido, Daisho, carrying two swords, katana, duels, fighting and dying for your lord. You know, those are all cool things. Whereas going back to the Kofun, you're like, you know, what are you tapping into? You can write a great story, but it's not going to tap into those pre-existing loves the way Muramasa does. That's why people love Muramasa. It's they're like, I wanted a samurai book, and damn it, I got one. On Appeals to God, it obviously depends on the nature of God. Perhaps free will requires his non-interference. That's a good point. It's also like God's will or plan is not always subject to your desires, right? So there's the mortal tendency to judge God when you don't have all the information, whereas God does. So you don't quite know. It's kind of like the old election arguments, like elect versus non-elect. Unconditional election or conditional election or free will. Well, I think it depends. Do you have any interest in film directing? I don't think I would be the right person to do that for technical reasons. I'm not. If I had a really good cinematographer that I trusted to be able to construct shots, I think I could direct a film. However, is that the best use of my time? I don't know. I think I'd rather write the movie and hand it to another, or like maybe come up with the story with the director, and I'll write the screenplay from the story we came up with, and then he'll direct it because he has an attachment to something he created. It's best if the director has a strong attachment to what he did, like Lucas, you know, or really lots of those, you know, Francis Ford Coppola. You have a strong attachment to what you're doing. It's good. And Lovecraft, the creator of all Azathoth, is asleep, and all existence is a product of his dream. And when he awakens, existence will come to an end. Yeah, that's from, I think that's from a Hindu myth originally. Right? Someone can correct me. I just found it off-putting on how historical stories in Japan always tend to be set in the same periods. I know why it happens. There's lack of information on a lot of periods. It's that, and just samurai are cool. Samurai are interesting. Same reason, you know, most medieval historical fiction is going to be, it's going to be Crusades era, because it's just the most interesting. There's knights still, but you don't have cannons. You know, you're not going back to like the Carolingian dynasty where half the people were speaking weird languages and people didn't understand any of the culture. I'm interested in your game design project from TechWitch. Send me an email, stu at davidvstewart.com or dvspress.com, or just find me on Twitter, David V. Stewart. It's just something I might want to do this year. I don't know. It's an idea, and people are interested in that. I could parse it out with them and then be like, it's not really viable. And if it's not viable, that's okay. I had a cool idea, and I just kind of flash it inside, and if it doesn't work, it's fine. Nothing lost. I know how to use Unity. I know a little bit about how to use Unity, but this is a side thing. I don't know if I would use Unity. That's why I was talking to my buddy Chad, who I've streamed with. He's a programmer and a comedian, but it's like, yeah, dude, we'll code it from scratch, because Unity changes its terms of service like halfway through. So like if you haven't released your game and they change their terms of service on how you can use certain things, you can be kind of screwed. And I feel like Unity is a converged company. I don't really trust them. I'd rather, because what I have in mind might be simple, I'd rather not do Unity. It's not like a full video game. It's something that's to facilitate table gaming. Dear David, please review the Matrix trilogy. Thanks. I probably will. I really like the Matrix. And, I think the Matrix has gotten better as I've gotten older. There's a website with an app that does rolling character sheets called Roll20. What I have in mind is that, but there's a monetization possibility there. And just a deeper level gameplay, so more of that's automated. So rather than saying, hey, you got to roll a d20, you'd hit a button that would like check your charisma and it would just do it, right? So you don't have to think about that. It automatically queues up the actions. So you can just say, I want to do this, and then you've just pressed the button. So it's even more automated. But there's also more elements. I don't know. I'm working on it. Cosmic horror trope, forbidden knowledge, like the Necronomicon. Absolutely. I love that one, actually. So forbidden knowledge, that goes back to, it's biblical. Hello, Star Trek theory, by the way. So it's biblical. The Garden of Eden. The knowledge of good and evil is forbidden. Why is it forbidden? There's so many enigmas wrapped around that myth, but it's so important to our humanity. And that's why Nietzsche says, be careful when you're hunting monsters that you don't become a monster. And when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. Meaning, as you quest for certain kinds of knowledge, as you quest to destroy, really, that has to do with, as you quest to destroy that which you don't like, which in his case was like, really Platonic ideas, which he considered without merit. What happens when you get rid of those? Well, you end up with nihilism, right? But forbidden knowledge, Nietzsche's also said some stuff about forbidden knowledge, but now it's not coming to me. So I'll just skip the Nietzsche for now. But when you study the devices of the enemy, you have the possibility of becoming him. That's Sauron, right? Or Saruman. I fractured my foot about 3 weeks ago, and now I have a few weeks off work, so time to dedicate to writing my detective series. So I'll let you know how the writing goes. Awesome. Let me know. Cosmic horror. Yeah, you know what? Cosmic horror is what it is. I like cosmic horror just as a... You say cosmic horror, people are like, I have an idea what you mean. Old gods. Video reviews from you, movies that we want you to review. Oh, yeah, don't... You can donate money to me with a request and I'll do it. But I don't want it to be like, let me pay you $50 to review a movie. It feels weird, I'll do it. I usually just do it anyway. Roll20 also lets you make maps and play music cues if you want to design all that yourself. Tested it. I'm just not sure it's worth playing it without the risk of pizza stains. Yeah. No, all those are good systems. OpenRPG is a good system, but my goal was to really take people out and away from the computer. Right? That you can really only play it in person. I have some ideas for that, but anyway, it could be terrible. One reason Lucas sold the company was so he could make smaller films while the employees kept their jobs with Disney owning it. Yeah, I think he was just done with it too. John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. Yeah, I'm trying to think of another one. It's not coming to me. That was similar to that. What are your thoughts on Invid Place Me? I don't know that. Sorry. A few months ago, I asked you about having one YouTube channel versus multiple, and you said your view on that may be changing, that you may go multiple. What's your recommendation? So, this is the worst. I'm not the best person to ask because I really do one that's too diverse. If you have one channel and you focus on one small set of topics, that's the best way to go. Rather than two channels, because if you have two, you're now not producing the maximum amount of content. So what I would do is I would start with one. Start with one that's the thing you really want to do. You really want to make content on, and just focus on that one thing and that one kind of content and hit it really hard. You're not going to get traction for a long time. But it'll happen. And once you've kind of produced a large backlog of content, then add that second channel to do the other thing. And then you can promote that second channel. And the whole reason is you want to keep people actively engaged, especially with gaming. With gaming, you don't want to interrupt the gaming queue with other kinds of stuff. It's gonna pull people out of what YouTube's trying to do to make you money. Do you think character sheets are a good idea for developing fictional characters? Why or why not? I don't use them, but they could be for you. There's not a good or bad idea. It depends on you and how you want to define your characters. If you want to think of them as like, this guy's charismatic, you could write D&D character sheets, or just say traits: he's charismatic, he's handsome, or he's ugly but smart, whatever you want to do. I usually put like one major trait down and that's it. But I really don't. They exist in my head. When you're reading a character, the character, I see him. Like, he visually exists, and I will describe him as I see him. And his personality is more like a real person to me. So I try not to draw him like within too heavily within some kind of archetype, or say like, well, he's charismatic in this. People get the idea that like Angelico from Needle Ash is a little bit more of a charismatic kind of guy, a little bit more sociable than Michael is, but Michael's not. Michael's slightly more socially oblivious, but he's not awkward, right? He's just kind of a more socially normal guy, but he's highly competent as a soldier, more competent than Angelico. So they kind of work together as friends. Angelico's competent, but he's not Michael. Michael knows how to fight a battle and knows how to win, and he's brave and he's strong and he's very, very good at what he does. But, he's not good at politics, and he's not even good at figuring out what this woman who's following him around that he's annoyed by actually wants from him. He's almost kind of oblivious and just doesn't know how to manage people nearly as well as his friend. So him and his friend kind of go well together. Same thing with Gisali. Gisali's also, he's the older, more gentlemanly kind of guy. But I'm giving you those traits. But to me, it's like Gisali's like a real person in my mind. So it was kind of hard to kill him, in case you haven't read the book. But like having somebody die, it's like, man, I really want him to keep living because I like him. It's hard to kill characters because almost every character I create, I want them to continue doing things, and then they die. The Unreliable Narrator, Nitaku. I think you will like this book that I'm writing. So the narrator is insane. And there's lots of little clues that he's not fully in control of himself. And it disturbs him. And he actually has superpowers, but he's not in control of those. And the superpowers have to do with being able to see the future and see the past. But he can't control when they happen, but he relies on them. At the same time, he has a split personality that goes in parcel that. He has 4 different personalities. One that exists in the future, one that exists in the past, as like a ghost, and then one that is literally his past self, but that person that is his past self is stark raving mad. And not only stark raving mad, but worships old gods. But he needs him because that person contains all of his like memories and his emotions. So it's the guy's insane. And so he is unreliable. And I think I've given away too much of the book already. I'm sorry. Basically, Lucas was beginning to make smaller films. Yes, and his company was losing money. Thus, he wrote treatments for new Star Wars films when he sold it, yet those were thrown out. For good or ill, it's a damn shame we'll never get to see his treatment ideas. I think he would be great if he released them. I just wish he would. It'd be interesting. Are you still planning on releasing an album later this year? I will see. I will see if I can create one. Sometimes I'm in a music creation mode, and other times I'm not, and it's hard for me to shift. And if I create music, then I'm not writing books. So it's hard to get into a different mode. I put out Memories Adrift, and that's not it. That's a Wuthering Heights album that I like, called Within. It's their first album. It's good. Not as good as their third one. So we'll see what I can do. I really want to write a metal album, and I have a lot of ideas to that. But I gotta persuade Jesse White to do vocals. He's an amazing vocalist. Or someone like that who's into doing power metal. So I think it's gonna be like classic metal, power metal. That's what's in my head. That's what's in my heart. TechWitch says Unity's a bit on the fat side. Yeah, it's big. I recommend using game engines instead of coding it from scratch. It's much faster production-wise. Yeah, I'm aware of that, but there's also a thing called... I don't remember the name of it. But basically, you will fix your... you will create the dimensions of the project based on what's feasible for you to do with the tool set at hand. So just as an example, if you have a 6x9... Or not 6x9. Let's do a 2x3 canvas and you're going to do a painting on it. Well, inherently, you're going to choose a subject which has a vertical alignment and some other things going on it. Whereas if you have a big wall and you're just going to paint on the wall, it could take almost any shape. So there's tremendous pluses to using an engine like Unity. People are saying not to use Unreal now because it's got all kinds of Chinese spyware or something. I don't even know what to use anymore. I have Unity still. I've written some really basic programs just to learn to code C# and stuff, which I'm not. I don't know C#. Do not take that as a statement that I know how to code. I was learning how to script, not that I know how to do it well. But it's good. It's a good engine. The scene arrangement is great for some games, but not for what I'm envisioning, and maybe not for the kinds of games that I might want to make. So I don't know. Are you familiar with the John Wick movies? And if so, I haven't watched them. Other than the first one, but not the whole thing, I think. And that's not because it bored me or something. I think I was watching it at a friend's house. But I'll watch them. I'll probably watch them. Everyone likes them, so there's something there. I just find earlier periods of Japanese history interesting. Facets of Japanese culture, just elements from the Tang Dynasty, frozen in time. Interesting. What do you think of choice-based video games? I like them, depending on the game. So I would play them. I think maybe like Banner Saga or something. I think of Dragon Age Origins is a great game. So the battle gameplay is very engaging, but there's another kind of gameplay which is called interact with your characters. And it's the best interact with your characters game since KOTOR, which was also done by BioWare. And it is a type of gameplay, is thinking about what would Morgan want me to say here, given that I want my character to bang her. No, she wouldn't want me to say I'm in love with her. I'll just say she's hot. Yes, I gained 3 reputation with her. Cool. So I like those, but they're great. They're fine. I just don't play them a lot because when I gravitate towards games, I'm not gravitating strongly towards that. It's more like gameplay. What I really wish they'd come out with is another Final Fantasy Tactics game. Terminator 1 or Terminator 2? T2 is better. What do you think about magic systems in fantasy novels? Are they required for it to be good? No, but there's also not a yes or no answer. So Conan doesn't have a magic system. Elric doesn't have a magic system, really. So they're great. Tolkien doesn't have a magic system. So no, you don't need them. But you can also go heavy or light, depending on what you want to do. Sanderson goes really heavy. Robert Jordan, it's towards the heavy side. It's not as concrete as Sanderson. Ursula Le Guin, it's mostly pretty light, but it's based on something, and you feel like there's limitations, and you feel like there's mastery involved with it. So Ursula Le Guin would be on the lighter side. One of the first authors to do like a more concrete magic system, and then Sanderson would be on the heavy side. You can do anything in between, depending on what you want. J.K. Rowling does it so that the kids only know a couple spells, whereas adults can know whatever spells you need the plot to require them to know. So adults are super powerful and kids are still learning, which makes the heroes of the story always underpowered compared to their opponents, and allows you to just throw in whatever the plot needs. Let you have some this guy has a spell that's important for the plot. Let you kind of mess with it that way. Soy Wars. Chernobyl recommendation. Thank you. I don't know if I'll watch it. The fear of not being fully in control of yourself is a great concept for horror from Nitaku. Absolutely. And it's somewhat underused, to be honest. You know why I think it's somewhat underused? Is that you don't want a character you like to do something that you don't want them to do. It makes it not very... Like if you're reading something like Lord Fowl's Bane, which is a fantasy book with an anti-hero named Thomas Covenant, and he thinks he's in some kind of dream because he's been hit by a police car. He thinks he's in a dream, and he rapes a 16-year-old girl pretty early on in the book, as some sort of like extreme test almost of this. But it's really just like he's not in control of himself when it happens. This Lord Fowl really is controlling his actions, and that's a thing that goes throughout the book. He's not in control. But that act by itself makes you stop rooting for him. Like it's very off-putting. There's a double-edged sword there. I think it's great for horror, though. I do think it is. Would a story that inverts Clark's law by revealing seeming technology to actually be supernatural in disguise, such as UFOs turning out to be demonic, be a good idea? Absolutely. I think that's a cool idea, right? Aliens aren't aliens, they're demons, and they're from the demon world. I think that's a cool idea. George Lucas has revealed from Archiver his sequel trilogy would have focused on the wills of the Force, the creatures that feed on the Force and control the universe. Interesting. Now that would be that would actually expand what's going on. What about trying to write a proto-sci-fi as it written by someone living during antiquity? Not a sci-fi per se, but close to as sci-fi as possible someone from then could think of. I don't know. It's an original idea. Someone from the past, like you could do, so it's a reverse of Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. So rather than the Connecticut Yankee going back to the medieval period and using all his knowledge of science, it would be someone from ancient Greece transported to a futuristic world where they are having to use their knowledge of logic to figure out how the world works. That would be very interesting, I think. Like if you went and snatched Aristotle from Macedon and just put him in a sci-fi setting. Boy, I think that would be very interesting. David said, learn to code. I can die happy now. I can learn to code. Anyone can. I actually, fun story, I actually learned initially how to program in C using a program called Max MSP. This was like 15 years ago. To create this randomized music. But I had to learn how to code in C to get the program to do what I wanted to do. It was like a modular, it's this visual space where you could actually add your own elements to it if you knew how to write C. So what I got the program to do was to chop up George W. Bush's inauguration speech. So I just put in a text document, chopped it up, and then used the letters to determine the note output for a piece that I did. Now, it sounded awful, but it was a cool idea. It definitely had a cool effect. And then I would read back the parsed up speech like through a vocal effects processor, which was also controlled through MIDI. It's kind of interesting. I'm developing a colossal character sheet from Scott Leno that asks questions designed to get authors to think about their characters more deeply. Would that be a worthwhile resource? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think a lot of people might get some benefit out of it. Maybe people don't think as deeply about their characters as they want to. I don't know. You don't never know. If you put it out there and it's a big hit, then bam, you've hit it. And other times you may put it out there and, you never know. You never quite know if something's original, whether there's market demand for it. You mean scoping, judging project feasibility. You can also use basic frameworks. Also, 2D is easier than 3D. 2D is easier than 3D. I just thought of a post-apocalyptic fantasy book series I read in high school where the main character had several split personalities. I think it's called Tribe of One. Interesting. Maybe I'll try to check it out. I cast plot armor on my protagonist. Speaking of character, part member interaction was the one thing Final Fantasy Tactics needed more of. Party member interaction, yeah. There need to be some more like party chat. But Final Fantasy Tactics was early. That was an early game. I just love the gameplay of it. The gameplay's great. I feel like the closest thing we have now is like Fire Emblem, which is great, but it's very different. It's very different, and I like Final Fantasy Tactics probably a little better as far as gameplay. And Fire Emblem does the character interaction thing very, very well. People love it for that reason. It's like, yeah, I do battles, but it's mostly so I can get my characters to get married and have children. It's like kind of funny. Is Western culture a post-Christian society, or is it becoming anti-Christian? I would say anti-Christian. There's no such thing as post-Christian. Really, post anything is anti, right? Post-modern is anti-modern. You know. So people say post-Christian. What they mean is you guys need to stop being Christians when they say post-Christian. We want to live in a society that's not Christian. That's what I think. George Lucas often did what he could to expand the universe while the new films regress the universe. They do. They shrink it. That's a good point. Were your comments regarding aliens actually being demons purely hypothetical in response to my question, or did you mean it as a statement of reality? Your wording made it unclear. I just mean it as a hypothetical. I don't think there are aliens. I don't think aliens exist. But they'd be cool if like you're writing a story on aliens and it's like they're really demons, Maybe what people think aliens are as demons. That could be reality. I don't know. I think aliens are. I don't really believe them. Sorry. If you're one of the belief in aliens people, sorry, I don't believe in them. I think they're fun to write stories on, though, for sure. One example is a true history written by the Greek writer Lucian of Samosata. Sorry. It involves fighting armies of the moon. Characters are sent to the moon by a magical wind. Ooh. Interesting. What would be an interesting take on Greek mythology? I'd say focusing on the primal deities like Nyx and Kronos. Of course, Kronos, I guess, was a Titan. But yeah, like the original deities, the nature deities, like who they are would be more interesting to me than just Zeus and Hera, because we've gotten a lot of them. It's interesting. I mean, Greek mythology is interesting because you have these primal deities like Nyx, and I'm trying to think of the actual name of, heaven and earth are deities, right? And so it's like they're from the dark ages of Greek, from Bronze Age collapse, and have been supplanted by other deities that have a more firm mythological base. The Titans, and then the Titans are supplanted by the gods, the Olympian gods, led by Zeus and Poseidon and Hades. This is very interesting. There's just not a lot done with those ancient primal deities. I would think there could be a lot of richness there, and that conflict through generations, which is also present in Norse pagan mythology. You have the Odin, son of Bor, son of Buri. There's again 3 generations before you get to the current gods. There's the Vanir and the Aesir, the nature gods and the more society war gods. And in that way, you also have the Titans, which are more nature gods, maybe like fearful nature gods, supplanted by the gods of order, the Olympians, the gods of society and war. It's interesting to think about it that way. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about Christianity, but ultimately he's a secular humanist. That's true. He's not a Christian. A lot of people mistakenly think that, but he's trying to think about like what do the stories mean on some humanist psychological level, rather than what do they mean at like some deeper spiritual level, and what do they tell me to do. I think fantasy with ensemble cast is boring. Excuse me. I need a main character to go through that hero's journey, and everyone is a side character. Hopefully, A Song of Ice and Fire will deliver in that fashion. Huh. Well, I mean, if you like a main character, you probably like my fantasy. Because I really do, each book is about one central character. So, Water of Awakening is, the main character is Helga. And she is on a quest to save her dying husband. And so it's her hero's journey, in which she's transformed and in many ways changed by that. Needle Ash is about Prince Michael and his quest to reclaim his kingdom. And so the third book, which I have 2 books planned, book 3 and book 4. I'm not sure which one will be book 3 and which one will be book 4. Book 3, Helga returns. But she's not the main character. She's part of the side ensemble cast to another set of 2 main characters going through their journey. And then book 4, the main character is a side character from Needle Ash. And so he's going off on his own quest and doing his own thing. And actually there's 2 main characters, and the second main character is a new one in that story. So 2 more coming for book 3, book 4. I'm not sure how many I'll write in this series. I do know where I'm going with it eventually, and I don't know how many books it's going to take to get there because I haven't plotted out book by book. It's more like each story has some contribution and some revelation to the nature of the bigger conflict, and eventually we'll get there. Oh, whoa. I missed a bunch of chats there. Something about pro-life. When pro-life states make laws that restrict abortion, places like New York allow abortion up to 9 months. Well, yeah, talk about a reaction, right? Will either side win over the other, or will it just cause more cultural divides? Eventually, I think it'll cause more cultural divides, but I think the coming conflict is trying to figure out who gets to decide this stuff, because we've been in this weird limbo now for 50 years since Roe versus Wade, where we're not sure how abortion laws should exist. We know that, like, the Supreme Court struck one down in a very strange decision. Roe v. Wade's a very weird decision that I've had several lawyers try to explain to me, and it doesn't make that much sense. And they're like, this is, for a lot of constitutional lawyers, is not considered a good case. It's a case where the decision seems divorced from the documentation, the opinions that the justices wrote. Like there's Fifth Amendment claims, against having to testify against yourself, but that doesn't seem like that would nullify the law. It's kind of weird. So we still have to figure all this stuff out. We have to figure out who decides. Does the state decide? Do we have to have a constitutional amendment that allows the states to decide, that specifically says the right to make a criminal law regarding abortion belongs to the states, or it's specifically legal, or it's specifically illegal? I'm surprised we haven't gotten to a constitutional crisis over it, but it needs to happen so we can stop having all these debates. But yeah, talk about a reaction. It's like, well, we're going to allow it up to 9 months. It's like, well, that doesn't seem like that's not centered on any kind of argument as to whether that should be okay. Anyway, Film Girl. I once read a romance book about the sub-god Apollo and a vampire. It was good and interesting. I'll take your word for it. Now, one thing that I've toyed with is writing full-on like romance books under a pen name, because there's an art to it. There's an art to the execution that when you have it figured out, it can be very fun to write a romance novel. I think it would be actually very fun for me to write one, but I don't think I'd release it under my name because of brand confusion, right? I don't want. I also, people ask about pen names. If I were writing romance, I'd probably release it under a woman's pen name. That's just a common thing to do, is that it tends to be women, for whatever reason, they see a woman's name on it with a romance novel. There's this idea that they're more likely to buy it. I don't know if it's true, but that's what the industry does, so there's probably some truth to it. Someone probably doesn't do it, and it causes them loss of sales. Do you think the two who are distant pen pals and live thousands of miles apart can meet and fall in love, or is it very unlikely? And is it a good setup for a romance? I think they can. I had several friends who got married to people in different parts of the country from playing World of Warcraft with each other. In fact, 3 different couples, for sure I've known, maybe more. It depends. 3 different couples I knew met playing World of Warcraft, specifically Classic and Burning Crusade, and got married and had kids. One moved to Australia. She moved to Australia and immigrated to marry this person she met playing World of Warcraft. And then one who moved from like the south to like Minnesota, I think. And then I knew one who moved to Florida and then he moved, or she moved to Florida, and then he moved to where she was from, and she stayed in Florida after they broke up. But I knew several people that did. So I can imagine it with pen pals. It can be fine. But where the interesting thing would be where they meet, and then maybe there's whenever you're writing a letter, you're not there's a missing layer. For instance, you're not hearing the voice, you're not seeing the person's eyes. There's a lot of things that go into attraction. So it turns out they're attracted to the image that they have of the other person in their mind, and they have to come to terms with that when they meet. I think it would be a great setup for a story, actually. So if you follow through with that, I think it could have a it could be great. There could be such a great moment where they meet and there's no chemistry, and then they have like a more logical romance, or there's immediate chemistry, but then you find out things about the person that are hidden, because that's the nature of writing letters. Kira says, I saw videos on Christianity really booming in China but fading in the West and holding strong in Russia. And Russia is kind of turning back to orthodoxy. It's interesting. Do you like the band Rush? Yes, I do. How about Marillion? Yes, I think so. I listen to a lot more Rush. I have every Rush album, and I've seen them live. Sorry, autocorrect, I meant sun god. Hopefully you got the idea. The sub god. Yeah, I thought you meant maybe sun. But I don't know. He could be less than a god, right? You could view him as a sub god to a greater god. Do you plan on writing a Valkyrie? I don't think so. I don't know yet, though. I don't have a plan on it. My fantasy series doesn't have Valkyries, I don't think. Romance is honestly very difficult for me to write. I often find that I'm not satisfied even with romantic subplots I've attempted to write. Not uncommon. I would study, if you want to feel more confident with it. I'm going to have some content coming out on Twilight. And I'll probably read a couple other, books that are focused on the female demographics, like the Nora Roberts books. Which my wife has read a bunch of those and describes she knows exactly how they do the setup in most of those books. So I'll do some explanation on how other successful authors have done it, and then you can adapt it to what you want to do, which is what I'm going to do, right? And now I have romance. So the first book here, I specifically wanted to write this where she's trying to save her husband, which means there's no romantic subplot. I didn't want that. I wanted something more like The Hobbit. There's no romance in The Hobbit. It's about the adventure and the personal growth, not about trying to find love. There is a love story in this one, and a little bit of a love triangle. And so one of the executions I did in Needle Ash was, you have two characters. One, usually the male is not wanting the female. So it's the female that desires the male more than the male desires the female, which it's going to appeal more to females than males. But also, to me, if I'm writing about a man who's intensely desiring a woman that he can't really get, it's too pathetic to me. Like, it's kind of gamma male, and it's not how I've acted as a man. I can understand it a little bit, but like, if a woman's not interested, I just move on. Not obviously I'm married, so I don't do that anymore. I don't move on. But like, if a woman wasn't interested, just move on. Whatever. You break up and you move on. Or she doesn't want to go out with you. Okay. I'm glad we didn't go out then, because probably that would be bad. So in this one, it's more like a traditional romance plot, but it's definitely like the B story. It's not the A story, and it's more executed like a movie, like a rom-com. There's a little bit of a love triangle towards the end of the book, and that kind of hypes up the emotion a little bit and helps with some of the resolutions. They get together, they break up, like there's a certain set of event sequences that you can play around with to create a compelling romance plot. So if anyone read it and liked the romance from it, most people are like, I like, this character. I've never started disliking a character as much as, and then liking the character at the end as much as it was with Sharona. She starts off rather annoying intentionally, and then, because you're kind of with Michael's side of it, and then becomes very lovable towards the end. Do you read manga? Not as much as other people. After I saw Alita Battle Angel, I read the manga. Very good. I recommend it. That one's probably on the list somewhere. My favorite manga, if you read the first 15 books of of Berserk. They're pretty good. The first 15 books are really good, actually. But I haven't read any of those in a long time because the story's just meandering at this point. It's not going anywhere. Maybe the reason I tend to include romance in my stories is because I'm a woman. Bring on the feminists will come to get me based on that comment. There's a reason. I mean, so if you're writing a movie, let's say you're writing a movie for general audiences, you're going to want a romance subplot if you can have one. And the reason is, anyone who's competent will tell you that it will appeal to men as well. Men do enjoy romance plots. They just never admit it. But the main thing is women openly really like romance plots. It's a major point of interest for the female demographic. So if you're writing, if you're making Jurassic World, there's got to be like a romance subplot, right? There's no romance subplot in Jurassic Park. But when they were remaking or requeling it into Jurassic World, they added a romance subplot because that's more engaging to the female demographic than merely the ideas and the action, which are engaging to the male demographic. So men tend to like action, violence, and big ideas. Women like more personal things. So if you have both of those elements, that's how you appeal to general audiences. You have a big idea, you have action, and then you also have more personal relationships. Personal growth. That's tends to be a little more focused on the female demographic. And when we look at Twilight, you'll see that it's very focused on the personalities and the outcomes of actions, not so much the actions themselves. In fact, the biggest action in the book is missing. You only see the outcomes of it. And that's something I'll point out, because that's not what's more important about action is the outcomes, not the way that you execute the action. It's a little bit of it's very male focused to think about exactly how you want to describe the sword fight. But women only really care about who wins it and the tension and the resolution that's involved in the fear of the sword fight, And of course, I'm generalizing. Everybody knows when you generalize, there's exceptions. Exceptions about. The point is which demographics we're interested in it. Female demographics tend to be more interested in romance. That's just it. Please read the whole Twilight series before you critique it. There's more to it than most people say. Well, I'm going to do some stuff on the first book. It's all technical stuff. I'm not going to say bad things about Twilight, other than there's things I wouldn't have done, or there's things that don't interest me, because Twilight was not written for my demographic. The goal is to figure out what it does and what it does well, and there's things that it does very well. Like I described the tropes. It's familiar tropes in an unfamiliar way. That's why it hooks you. Same thing with Harry Potter. So people who say it sucks, is it technically poorly executed? I actually don't think so. Now, I'm not a big fan of the prose in Twilight, but the prose is there to function as progressing the story. The dialogue's fine. The dialogue is actually fairly natural. It's a little bit, it's a little bit more advanced than the way kids would actually talk, but that's fine. We're trying to communicate meaning with dialogue, not always have the exact words someone would say. So it does a lot of things well. But that doesn't mean that it's like every person's going to enjoy it. Some people will find it intolerable. What novels are overrated in your eyes? Game of Thrones is overrated. What else is overrated? I'd have to think. Some overrated novels. I think... Well, the thing is, there's things like Da Vinci Code I think is a little overrated, but people like to hate on that as much as anything else. Anything that's popular, it's hard for it to be overrated because the haters come out of the bush to hate on it. And I'm probably one of those, but, I think To Kill a Mockingbird is actually overrated. I think a lot of the literature that you're forced to read in high school is very overrated. I think most Ernest Hemingway is. I think Ulysses is an interesting technical read, but is essentially not a fun book to read, so it's not good. What else? I think Jane Austen's massively overrated. I think Dickens is overrated too. But I understand the time that it was written is going to produce a book that's suboptimal for what I want. So at the same time, I'm like, it's overrated. I'm like, but it's not that overrated because, it was very good for the context in which it existed. If children are raised seeking approval from government teachers, they will learn to love the government as adults. I don't need to add anything to that. That's true. that's it. I mean, that's one of the things we were talking about with the gaming disorder stuff. All right, let me read the last comments and then talk about this concept of measuring the table, and then we'll go. Would you be interested in inventing a fictional age that could be home to a slew of different stories like Hyborian Age? I like that idea. I haven't done it, but I like it. Most of the modern romance novels that I have seen make the woman's love interest an uncivilized and brutish man. Chivalry must be unpopular. It's the bad boy archetype. Archiver. The bad boy archetype. And so the way romance readers like to interact with the bad boy archetype, and actually Edward Cullen's a perfect example. It's perfect. He's described as perfect so often in the novel. It's kind of funny. But let's see here. So the bad boy represents primal masculinity. So violence, danger, power, the ability to harm others. Now, the female desire towards the bad boy is not that you want the bad boy because he is going to abuse you. It's that his violence is going to be directed against things which could harm you. So the fantasy is that the bad boy represents a hyper-masculine protector, and the woman's job is to civilize him into a man that represents the best of both worlds. So he's the hyper-masculine protector, but he's also the chivalrous, or maybe not chivalrous, but he's also he has fidelity. And so Han Solo is actually an even better example. Han Solo is a total bad boy, and Leia hates him, but her desire towards him is undeniable because of his intense masculinity. And he can't have that masculinity without engaging in danger and play, as Nietzsche would say, right? So his main focus is danger and play. And that's what's it's primally attractive because he represents power and violence. And then she eventually civilizes him as she falls in love with him. And he becomes a paragon-like character by the time you get to Return of the Jedi. Is that his masculine, violent energy has been focused into something good. That's the female fantasy. Now, the way it's executed in Twilight is rather than Bella taming Edward, it's revealed that Edward is essentially good. He's like a good guy that has an element of danger to him because of the nature of his being. So he represents that duality, but not because of the female fantasy where you tame him into a civilized beast. Does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. What novels, let's see here. Has Christianity impacted your life positively? Definitely. Don't have enough time to go into every little bit, but first of all, believing that there's meaning, believing that there's judgment after death, and understanding, this is a big one. This is one that's a recent kind of growth of mine and understanding of mine. Nothing that I have in my life I have acquired through my own virtue and my own strength. I have not earned what I have. What I have has been given to me. I haven't earned it. And I can go into a lot of specifics about why that's the case. But I don't need to. Like my wealth, my success, to an outsider would see random or just unearned. But the things which I did earn, the wealth which I did earn, was taken away from me through betrayal and horrible things which happened to me over a decade ago now. And I maybe someday I'll go into really big specifics on this, but there's even legal reasons why I probably can't, because I'm not going to get into it. But basically, I had my career destroyed over 10 years ago because of my naivete and misunderstanding personal relationships. But what I earned, the things which I had worked for years to accomplish and to gain to myself, wealth, a career of positive growth, all that was taken away from me. So the things which I earned, I've lost. But the things which I have, I didn't earn. They were given to me. So my life is either the result of like random occurrence or something else, right? And so because I'm not in control, I have an understanding that I've been given something better than what I would have had I actually executed my will properly. So had I been given the kingdom of my will, I would be I would be a lesser man than I am. I would never have written books. I would never be as healthy as I am. I would never be married to the woman I'm married to and have the wonderful children I have, a big house, cars, wealth. And I am wealthy compared to most people. Now, I say that like if you were to come to my house, you'd be like, you're doing pretty good, but you're not rich, man. It's like compared to how most people are like living in a studio apartment cooking fries, man, I'm doing great. So this is an understanding. It's like the outcomes of my life are, the more further I go, the more I believe in unconditional election. It's not my choice. My will, I can try to execute my will, but things will happen. And so I just have to accept how they happen. And know that, that Boethian thing is working out. I hear my daughter crying. I'm going to have to tie it up here. As a writer, how important is spontaneous writing versus planning things out? It depends on you. I think it's important to plan out the big stuff. At the very least, plan out your big plot points, who's going to portray who and when. And then I don't plan out scenes. I don't do scene by scene. Some people do it. It depends what helps you as a writer. Every person's different. You try it both ways. You can try in a limited fashion, really doing a heavy planning. And if that doesn't make you feel creative as just sitting down and writing where your heart is, then do that. And other people balance it in other ways. They plan stuff out big in a very detailed fashion, and they write things out of order because of where their passion is with that. And I think that works great for film scripts. I think I've written scenes out of order in film scripts, and it works great. Combi Chan says, sounds like one hell of a story. I don't know if I want to get it out there because it's too personal in some cases, and familiarity breeds contempt. I'd rather be enigmatic. What do you think of F. Scott Fitzgerald as a writer? Massively overrated. I think The Great Gatsby is one of the most overrated books of all time, and maybe I will talk about that in another video. It's a gamma male sex fantasy. And like a gamma male sex revenge fantasy where all the alphas are evil dudes who get what's coming to them. It's pathetic. Like, it makes me... when you understand F. Scott Fitzgerald's life, you understand the book. It's about how pathetic he is. He's a pathetic dude that women don't like, and that's what the book's about. The Chads are all the bad guys. He's a virgin, and he's looking at the Chads with anger that he's not a Chad. That's The Great Gatsby. It's a very overrated book, and it's boring as well. Do you think... Kira says, thank you for your detailed Q&A. Live long and prosper. Thank you. Do you think that wordiness is a writing flaw? Dickens is a prime example where I feel that something he describes could have been done differently. Depends on the context. Nowadays, yes. In the 19th century, no. When you are reading Ivanhoe, the descriptions are heavy, but you understand the people he was writing for. Books were their only form of entertainment that they had ready access to because theater was expensive and rare. So heavy descriptions weren't a big deal. People also consume books differently. If you didn't want to read the descriptions, you can skip it. Something you could do is read Ivanhoe and only read the dialogue. You'd get the story. Great. You wouldn't need any of the description. It'd be an interesting experiment, but I think it would actually make Ivanhoe more enjoyable for people who can't tolerate that level of detail. Same thing with Dickens. Read Great Expectations, only the dialogue, and see what you get out of it. You'll find that you understand the story pretty well, and intense stuff is not that important. Now, reading something like Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, that one it tends to be a little wordy with the prose, and it's got a lot of hoop-de-doodle, as who said that? Who called it hoop-de-doodle? Who am I thinking of? Name slips my mind. The author who said that slips my mind. But hoop-de-doodle's just like pretty prose. It gets in the way of the story, So I'm personally of write good prose that sets the correct emotions and the correct images. Focus on the important images, and then move on. Twilight contains virtually no descriptions. The descriptions are very brief, and that's ideal for that kind of book. You want to focus on the characters. You want to focus on the actions. Whereas a high fantasy book, you maybe want more descriptions because that's why people read the book. They want you to describe the intricate elf architecture or whatever kind of cool thing you're dealing with in your high fantasy book. So it depends on the book, depends on the context. It's not yay or nay. But I think if you let your prose get out of control, it's going to get in the way of the story, and most of the story is told through dialogue in almost every genre that I can think of. Get that fries and studio apartment lifestyle. It's not that bad, man. I envy people who... I envy, my youth in a sense, where it's like, go play a gig for a couple hours, make some money, come home, play World of Warcraft, and drink a bunch of beer, wake up, do it all the next day. Example, Tale of Two Cities, Wine in the Street Scene, and many others in the same book. Oh, yeah. Regarding your comments about your life, do you think that God has certain things that are planned out but lets the chips fall where they may regarding others? Yes. So I am kind of in the Boethian camp where free will exists, but you have to think that a being as powerful as God is going to be able to execute his plan. So you need not worry about running afoul of God's plan or of being impotent. Both can be true at the same time. So Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy deals with that a lot. Thomas Aquinas also deals with it. Maybe one day I'll get into it. Combi Chan says, laugh my ass off. I sent you Great Gatsby Virgin Chad to all my friends. We never got that from reading it in high school. No one ever does, because high school teachers are usually women. High school English teachers are usually women. So they are not reading the book from the perspective of a man that's going to be like, this author is pathetic. He's a gamma male. He's a beta, not even beta, dude. He's like omega. No, girls don't want him. And he's upset that a girl didn't like him. He wrote this, he ran into his girlfriend and she's like, was I one of the characters in your book? And he's like, which bitch do you think you are? And it's like, he probably felt really good about saying that. And she was just like, why was he such a dick to me? It's like, because he's been seething over the fact that you didn't love him as much as he loved you for years. He is Gatsby. Anyway, when I was a kid, Eric Goldenhire, what do you think about Leo Tolstoy? I like Leo Tolstoy. I like Crime and Punishment a lot. It's a very good book. I enjoy it a lot. I don't know if I can... maybe I can do content on it some other time. But yeah, I like it. I think it's a good classic read. And it's not... not to go too deep into it, but it does a lot of things that modern literature is just afraid to do. It kind of tests... It's modern in one sense and completely romantic in another. It's good. Last comments, Kira. When I was a kid, I watched Star Trek. I wonder how the holodeck affected the mental health of the crew. It's a video game. It didn't affect their mental health any more than video games affect our mental health today. The main entertainment of the future was video games, guys. They saw it before we did. Of course, now it's a mental disorder if you like games. Last part about Charles Dickens. Oliver Twist is a Gary Stu. He acts like a paragon despite being an orphan in a group of thieves. Totally. A little bit, but that's... I don't know. I forgive it. I forgive him. It's still a okay story. All right. When you measure the table, you measure the ruler. So here's your daily logic before I get out of here. I've gone way too long with this stream. I'm so sorry. So here's your daily logic. When you measure the table, you are also measuring the ruler. What this means is that when you create a metric or you are using a metric for anything, the outcomes of that metric are also rating the quality of that metric. So if you get a ruler out and you measure the table and it says 6 feet, well, you've also measured the ruler, meaning that 6 feet on that ruler is the length of a table. When we kind of abstract this to other ideas, if you create a psychological test where the majority of people are insane, is that a good psychological test? The answer would probably be no, because the whole point of insanity is that it's disordered thinking that's far outside the norm. That's the most robust definition of insanity I can think of. So in other words, somebody who thinks that green aliens are in every corner trying to tickle his toes is insane, because no one else sees that. No one else is afraid of that. It's far outside the norm as far as perception, thought, worry, anxiety, all that stuff. So that is insanity. If you create a diagnostic. And the DSM, the ever-growing DSM, is quickly becoming a ruler which isn't useful. So if you pull your ruler out and you measure the table and it's 6 feet one time and 2 feet another time, or 12 feet another time, that's a bad ruler. And so that's what you're going to end up with the DSM, which is everybody has a disorder. In the future, everybody will be insane, which means everybody can take medication. Everybody should be on medication, actually, because we're starting from a medical perspective. And so what is happening is that psychology is quickly becoming a field which should be exposed as being full of charlatans. Not that all psychologists are charlatans, or therapy's bad, or therapists are charlatans, but the establishment as a whole and this idea of these systematized disorders in which almost anyone could have one. In fact, if you go through and if you're liberal with it, everybody qualifies. That means nobody qualifies. That means your ruler's broken. So there's a lot of things today where that is the case. With special education, almost anybody could qualify for special education services. If you pushed hard enough and if you dug deep enough for a disorder, you could probably find one. And if you know special educators, which I do, having worked in education for years and years, they will tell you often that there's people who just, for whatever reason, they intensely desire for their kids to receive special education services or accommodations on some level, and they will push until they find something that they can do. So any child could be disabled. It's just a matter of how hard the parent wants to push for that child to be qualified as such. Children with anxiety disorders, because tests cause anxiety. It's like, of course they do. Tests make everybody anxious. I was like, oh, well, the doctor has said that this kid can't take tests now. You get up with things like that where if they push hard enough, it becomes a lawsuit thing. Anyone can be insane. If you were to test most 8-year-old boys, they'd have ADHD. Right. So when you measure the table, you also measure the ruler. Meaning, if outcomes are absurd, then your metric is bad. That's what that basically means. Be careful and watch for that as you go. Thanks to you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Last question. What do you think will be the next big thing in tentpole cinema? Or will Marvel dominate it? Marvel will decline. I don't know what will be the next thing. It'll be a black swan, something that we don't fully expect. But thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I'm out of green tea, which means I need to go. And tune in every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Make sure you're on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list, to get my next book for free. Everyone on the mailing list is going to get this one for free because I have no idea whether it's going to be good or whether people are going to like it. So we'll get it out there, and hopefully it'll be an enjoyable and fun read for all of you. Have a great night, and I will see you guys next time.